Get rid of your credit card debt, get a lower monthly payment, and skip your next 2 house payments at SaveWithConrad.com. NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket to save thousands with SaveWithConrad.com. Find out how much money you can save right now at SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. But before we even get started, Conrad, I just want to thank everybody that's listening. Every time I do one of these episodes and I'm done with it, I just think about how grateful I am to have this opportunity and be a part of the community that you've established here, you and the team have established here at part of Podcast Seed and Ad Free Shows Network. It's a great thing, and thank you to everybody that's listening.
I didn't develop it, dude. We developed it, and we're excited that you guys are here along with the ride. It's fun to record with you every week, man. You know, this is, I guess, technically something that we do for a living as part of our income, but man, I'd pay to do it. I'm having so much fun, and I love talking about the good old days of professional wrestling, and we're going to do that today. We're going to have a little fun talking about the Four Horsemen. And I think I have an idea of what you think about the Horsemen. We're going to find out for sure, and we're going to examine that in long form. But before we do, man, we should talk about some big news in wrestling these days. Goodness gracious, it finally happened. This past week, AEW announced their brand new show. This will be their third television show. Of course, we all know how blockbuster it was when Tony Khan was able to land live shows on Wednesday night called Dynamite. And then soon after, he rolled out a Friday night operation called Rampage. We know there's been a couple of shows on YouTube, Dark and Elevation, but now he's acquired Ring of Honor. And now he's also got a Saturday night AEW show, Collision. It's a real thing, and it's going to be here before you know it. As you and I are recording, it's inside of a month. It's going to be live on Saturday, June 17th. And man, I can't help but notice that the graphic and the presentation, boy, it feels a little nostalgic for a little thing called Nitro, which used to be a big doggone deal on TNT. What'd you think when you heard the announcement? And more importantly, what'd you think about that new logo?
Well, the announcement is, it was kind of anticlimactic because we all saw it coming, the rumor of it and various details of it, however correct or incorrect they were. It's been floating around now for a couple of weeks. So, interesting, I guess. I've talked about, and John Elba and I are going to go into the business of this in greater detail on Strictly Business, but it's great news in I guess many respects, or a couple of respects. Financially, it's probably a good thing for Tony. We don't know what the details of that are, but I'm assuming it's going to be financially a good deal for Tony, maybe a great deal. We don't know. Strategically, I think it's a bad move. I've said that since the very beginning. In fact, back when AEW was, promoting the stuff that they were going to do on YouTube, I kind of shook my head and went, man, don't do that yet. Build your core audience, grow your brand, make sure you have a strong foundation before you expand in more programming, more content. Because it takes time, it takes money, it takes creative resources, it takes human resources. And until you've got your infrastructure, your team, your process all in place, and you can add another show without diluting or taking away from your core product, whether that be human resources, financial resources, which probably isn't an issue, but human resources is, and clearly creative resources are. There's enough talent. No question about that. But I think the creative resources and experience within AEW have proven to be less than, inspiring. So they've got their work cut out for them. I'm going to remain optimistic. I hope it works. Oh, yeah, and let's throw in the fact that it's Saturday night from 8 to 10, targeting 18 to 49-year-old males. Obviously, somebody in TBS programming knows something or believes something that I don't know or believe. But that's a tough spot. And then you add the, clown car antics, surrounding CM Punk and the announcement and the unannouncement and all that. They're stepping into a very difficult time period, day part, Saturday night. They're stepping into it awkwardly with all the buildup and the hype and the speculation about CM Punk being the center of the show and all that. And now they're sending out press releases saying CM Punk's not affiliated with the product. That is not the right way to debut a show. That I can tell you. So I'm not negative about it. I think realistic about it, hopeful for the team at AEW, but it is not without challenges.
Well, listen, I don't want to pretend that I think I have all the answers to any of this, but as you might imagine, I do have some counterpoints for you, some head scratchers based on what you said, in my opinion. We'll start with the Saturday night time slot. First of all, I mean, I think we both agree, and I don't know, but I would imagine that it's not like Tony was able to dictate, okay, I'll take a show on so-and-so day. Like the network is going to have the leverage there. And I wonder from your perspective, how is Saturday night much different than Friday Night SmackDown on Fox?
Well, number one, because it's Fox, so you've got a broader reach. Anytime you've got a network opportunity versus a cable opportunity, and let's face it, TBS is not, they're probably in the top 5, I would imagine. I haven't looked in a long time, maybe the top 10, but TBS is not the hottest network on cable. And you can't really compare TBS on Saturday night to Fox on Friday night.
You mean TNT?
Or TNT, I'm sorry, TNT. You can't compare. Now TNT, I'm sorry, brain fart there. TNT is a more popular network, in large part because of the NBA and the eyeballs that attracts, and they're able to build on throughout the year. But I just don't think you can compare either TNT on a Saturday night or TBS to Fox. It's an unfair comparison, number one. WWE is an established I'm sorry, go ahead.
TNT is the 5th, as of December 2022. They're the 5th most watched cable network. So
okay, well, that's good, but that's not fantastic. I just don't think WWE's is an established, has been for decades, has an established audience. AEW has got, I think they've cornered the market on hardcore fans that will pretty much, fall in love with anything AEW does. Good for them. Much like ECW did, right? ECW ECW captured 100% of that portion of the audience that really loved that extreme hardcore alternative presentation of wrestling. And I think AEW in some respects has done the same thing. But certainly they're not strong enough to compete with WWE. This isn't a criticism. It's just a reality because they're such a new company. It would be impossible to really compete or compare to WWE and Fox.
Well, I guess what I was saying is, you're saying it's a hard night to capture an audience, and maybe someone at TNT or Turner knows more than you do about how they're going to be able to do that. But WWE's doing it the night before on a Friday night. And I would argue that being on network versus being on cable matters less and less. I understand generations ago, people used to have, over the air antennas. So they would have rabbit ears way back when, and you could pick up those channels, but you had to pay for cable. I get that. But now it feels like a lot of people have just cut the cord completely, and they're using things like YouTube TV, which would give you both Fox and TNT. So I think that matters less and less, but the parallels are there for me. Like, I think back to when you were sort of dictated to, when you were a part of this Turner organization, and they said, okay, Eric, you're doing a Thursday Thunder show now. You've acknowledged, boy, that was really stressful and put a lot of stress on all the resources in your organization, not just personnel, but everything. And you didn't really want to do it, but you had to, because that's what the network wanted. We don't know the way this is coming out. But ultimately, we understand that the key revenue driver now is no longer pay-per-views, it's no longer ticket sales, it's no longer merch. Those still matter, but it's all television rights. So doesn't it stand to reason that Tony Khan's in a similar circumstance that you were, where if the network wants another show, yes, you technically were their employee, I get that, but he's got to sort of keep the cash cow happy. If they need another show, he's kind of got to do it, right? I mean, he's trying to get some more leverage and grow that number. You do that by being a good partner, right?
Being a great partner, not a good partner, a great partner is such an important part of the equation. You have to have a great relationship with your television partner, especially, as you pointed out, is now the television and rights fees are the key driver. So yes, if Turner came to Tony Khan and said, we absolutely have to have a show, we want another show, we're willing to pay for another show, we believe another show will be beneficial to the network and eventually your brand, so here's what we want you to do and here's what we'll pay you, it would be hard for Tony to walk away from that.
Right.
It'd be hard for me to walk away from it. I might want to, but I understand that. I understand that he may, because we don't know, do we? We don't know if this is something that's being kind of, I don't want to say forced, but put upon Tony, and Tony's just reacting to it, or if this is Tony wanting to do another show. We don't know. We're assuming that Turner is mandating this. I don't believe that is the case, but Tony Khan once said, and this isn't something, I'm not trying to start shit here, but Tony Khan once said early on after the start of AEW, I'm not going to make the same mistakes WCW made. I'm not going to go into the litany of mistakes that have been made and continue to be made by Tony that are significant, and many of them are similar to some of the mistakes that I made. And he's making the same ones. This is another one where if I was Tony and I was looking at the long-term viability of my brand, I would do everything I could to talk Turner out of creating that Saturday night show, if indeed they're pushing it on him. If Tony's stepping up and wanting to do another show for any reason, then I question his judgment, because it clearly does not have the resources. And what we've seen in the last couple of days with this, I can only refer to it as a clown car competition regarding CM Punk and the litany of the mistakes that have been made, profound ones too, by the way, that have been made that has created this situation, tells me that internally, just as a business operation, they still don't know what they're doing. And I think that's a challenge. I just, and again, it's probably because of my own experience with Thunder and the impact that had on WCW and the bad decision that was. And keep in mind, we were hot. We were beating WWE at the time.
Right.
We were outperforming our competition head to head. We were generating tons of money. We were well into the profit, 30, 40, $50 million a year in profit, depending on whose accounting you wanted to believe. It was actually more than that. But because of intercompany allocations and the way Turner was structured, WCW didn't get credit for a lot of the revenue that we created for the Turner organization. But even at the peak, at the height, we were in so many ways, strategically and tactically, so far ahead of the game. And Thunder really, really, I think, was that was the beginning of the end. People like to, when did WCW really, what was the, finger poke of doom, Sting not winning the title at Starrcade, fans and people that weren't in the business and don't really understand the business beyond what they see on TV or they read on the internet, it's easy to point to those things. But the real fatal mistake was adding Thunder. And because I lived through that, I would hope that Tony wouldn't make that mistake again. But here we are. It is what it is. And look, I hope I'm wrong, for the sake of a lot of great talent that have great opportunities in AEW, making good money in AEW. I really hope I'm wrong. I just don't think I am.
Well, listen, I often wonder when I hear you, because I mean, I think sometimes people discount your take in your opinion because it's not popular and because maybe they're AEW tribalists. And listen, I'm a huge AEW fan and friends with a lot of those folks and count Tony Khan amongst them. But I do at least listen when you talk because you're one of the only guys who've been in this spot, like really in this spot, even with Turner. But a few moments ago, you were even critical of him having a YouTube show. And I'm wondering, like, how is that different from having a syndicated show named Prime or Pro or Worldwide? Like, I understand once upon a time it was all about Saturday night, but then it was about Saturday night and Nitro, but that's just part of the equation. You still had these other weekend syndicated shows, the Power Hour and all that sort of thing. Isn't that kind of the same thing? Like you're trying to just get eyeballs out there on the product. And if you've got all this talent on the roster, and YouTube now is a global property, so it's not something that you could only see domestic or you got a bicycle tapes here or there. Aren't you just leaning into a more modern version of the syndicated show, except now it's global and on demand?
Couple things. Number one, those syndicated shows created revenue for Turner, and they existed long, not a lot, but they did. Those shows existed long before I arrived in WCW.
Right.
I didn't endeavor to add programming to WCW. I knew it wasn't even my idea to add Nitro, by the way. Truth be known. It's well established, well documented. That was a Ted Turner idea, not an Eric Bischoff idea. I was trying to reduce the amount of content that we were producing, like I was trying to reduce live shows or live events, for example, for the very same reason. I wanted WCW's core product to be as successful and have the production values and the creative necessary for it to become profitable. The difference is Tony is this is proactive on Tony's part. At least the YouTube shows are. Again, we don't know situation with. I mean, Rampage was, I think, a Tony Khan idea that was a result of the move from TNT to TBS with Dynamite. That was part of, and Tony told me this in his own words, that was Tony's response to, we're going to have to move you to TBS. Well, okay, if you do that, can we get another show on TNT? I don't know what the details of the negotiation sounded like, but it was a minute and a half conversation I had with Tony at one point. That was a Tony Khan decision. That was a Tony Khan strategy. The difference is, the point is, it's not a difference. The point is, Tony needs to establish AEW to begin a growth pattern in AEW, to create a demand with that growing audience for additional programming. I don't know that he's created that demand. The AEW product as a television product, I don't want to hear about Wembley. That's a one-off. That's outside this conversation. The television product is what it is. It hasn't seen growth in forever. They've got a solid 850,000 viewers a week. Now you can argue, yeah, but TBS, if they weren't happy with it, they wouldn't have expanded the program. This is true. It's a vote of confidence for Tony. Whether he wanted that Saturday night show or Turner wanted that Saturday night show, doesn't freaking matter. It's a vote of confidence from the network. We'll see if ultimately it has a positive or a negative impact on AEW. But going back to the point, it was Tony's strategy to embrace YouTube before, in my opinion, he really had his feet firmly on the ground when it came to the creative or when it came to his infrastructure. I don't think you can really compare them. I mean, we had WCW Saturday night. We had WCW main event on Sunday night on TBS. So we had two shows on cable, and we had probably 3 or 4 of them in syndication. But those all existed before I got there.
Well, I understand that you and I both share a growth mentality in our approach to business and things like that. But I mean, even last week with all the NBA playoffs and all the NHL playoffs, AEW was still top 10. I think they came in number 9 on that Wednesday. And that was some really stiff sports competition. I mean, there were 3 NBA shows and 2 NHL shows ahead of it. And then that CNN town hall with Trump. And I'm just saying, I don't think it's nearly as doom and gloom as you do. I'm much more optimistic. And I think it's, if anything, this does solve at least one of the problems that you and I have identified, along with, well, everyone else, that, boy, there sure is a lot of talent on this roster, and there's only so much TV time to go around. Now, perhaps this is an opportunity to showcase some more of that talent, because he's got a hefty roster, and now maybe this represents more opportunity for some of those folks who felt a little frustrated with their spot, if you will. That's got to be a net positive, right?
No.
Okay.
But potentially, yes. But what have we seen out of that? Because that puts a lot of pressure on AEW creative. It's just because you put someone on TV doesn't mean they're going to get over, clearly. Just because you give somebody an opportunity on television doesn't mean that it's going to work for anybody. So having a roster, again, one of the mistakes that I made that Tony has decided to replicate, having that many people on your roster and feeling the need to, well, I've got to come up with another television show to get these people on television. I'm sure that wasn't the driving, motivation.
Right.
But to say, well, I got all this talent. Now I've got an opportunity to showcase them on TV. Showcase them in what? Showcase them on a pretty tough night on a Saturday night, arguably industry-wide, that's accepted. It's just a tough night. But have we seen any creative at all, really consistently out of AEW that would suggest that this is an opportunity where talent is going to get a shot and AEW creative is going to do something that elevates them? Or are we just going to expose them in bad story and poor production and, kind of the same old that we've been seeing on YouTube and frankly, Dynamite? I know it's unpopular because there's a lot of fans out there that love it, but I think for the most part, AEW Dynamite is very indie-rific. And if that's your thing and you love that indie-rific style and presentation, then you love that show. But it's not going to grow beyond that core audience that they control. They've got a great handle on 850 some odd thousand people that are into that indie-rific presentation. And that's what it is. And just seeing more of the same thing isn't going to get that talent over. It'll get them on TV. They'll be able to tell them family and friends and text their buddies, from high school, say, hey, check me out. I'm on TV. That's all fun, but it doesn't mean they're going to get over. In fact, it could go the other way. There's 2 ways of killing talent. One is to not expose them enough, and the other is to overexpose them. Those are 2 really great ways of killing off careers. And if I'm an AEW talent, I'm going to be excited on one hand, because now maybe I'm going to get an opportunity to be on television and prove, what I'm capable of. But on the other hand, from a business perspective, if I'm getting that opportunity and I shit the bed, either because the creative isn't right or nobody's watching television, now I'm stuck with that stink. Now that stink's going to follow me around. So I don't know, man. And I'm not doom and gloom. Don't get me wrong. I'm just a realist. For every action. Well, but I'm being honest. I have not been a fan, or I have not seen anything out of AEW that suggests to me that there is a really great creative brain trust. Quite the opposite.
Why aren't we talking about creative? Who gives a shit?
Because creative is what's going to determine, in a large part, is going to determine whether or not this Saturday night show is a good thing or a bad thing for the talent,
but come on now, Eric,
or for the brand.
You're just wanting to be argumentative today.
No, I'm not. I actually am not. It's quite the opposite, because every time I'm trying to offer an alternative perspective, and it's like every time we talk about Tony Khan or the tapeworm, it's like, oh, Eric Bischoff is obsessed. He's jealous because Tony didn't hire him. Are you fucking kidding me? I wouldn't go to near AEW for any amount of, well, that's not true. I am a whore at heart, but at any reasonable amount of money, I wouldn't go near that place right now. I wouldn't want to even be in the same zip code, because then all the dysfunction that you're seeing to now, like on a daily basis, that's making headlines, would all be attributed to me. I just, no, thank you. I've been there. You know, I went to TNA once, and the entire world thought that I was making every business and talent decision within TNA and creative, and that wasn't the case. No, I wouldn't go near Tony Khan or AEW right now. I think it's a mess. But that's just me. You know? I didn't bring this up. I didn't ask myself this question. I'm just responding to it. And I try to be honest. I try to have some grace. I understand that Tony is going through growing pains, and I identify with that. I have a lot of empathy for Tony that sometimes I don't express here, because I know the kind of pressure he's under. And I feel for him in that regard. But I'm just honest about this, having lived through it. As you pointed out, name me one person you know that has been in a situation that is even remotely as parallel as this one. Name me one person you know that was in the position I was in and grew that brand and competed directly with WWE and stumbled and fell and messed some shit up with some bad decisions along the way. You can't find anybody else. And when I'm asked a question, I give an honest answer. I don't give a political answer. I don't give a kissing Tony's ass answer. I give an honest, objective answer. And people who, like you, think I have an axe to grind, or I'm just being doom and gloom, aren't really seeing the point.
No, you have a hard on for Tony Khan, and it's not because of Blue Chew. But if you do want one, Blue Chew can hook you up. It's a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. You can take them anytime, day or night. So plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. And the process is simple. You'll sign up at BlueChew.com. You'll consult with one of their licensed medical providers. And once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. And here's the best part. It's all done online. So that means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. And Blue Chew's tablets are made right here in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door, all in a discreet package. But there won't be anything discreet about your package. Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex. Discover your options at BlueChew.com. Chew it and do it. And boy, we got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code 83weeks at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com. The promo code is 83weeks, and you'll receive your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we want to thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast. So, Eric.
Hey, Conrad, before we forget, because we spent a half hour talking about this nonsense.
Oh, I'm not done.
By the way, Keith Morrison, who's a part of the Ad Free Show's family, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. All of you, Coach Rosie, Eddie Pray there, so many of you, Bobby, Kilo Foxtrot 5, Golf Tango X-Ray. Thank you for joining us this morning. But Keith says, I love you, Eric, but I think these answers are too personal and thinking way too much about AEW. I don't think about AEW unless I'm asked a question, Keith. That is my point. You were proving my point. I didn't ask myself to comment on the recent developments of AEW. I was asked that question, and I'm asked frequently when I do interviews or I'm a guest on someone else's podcast. And I will continue to answer them as honestly as I can and objectively as I can. It's not personal for me. I don't care. Whatever happens in AEW, whether it's the greatest thing in the world and they have incredible success, or whether they don't, is not going to affect my life one way or the other. It is not personal. The only time it becomes personal for me is when Tony, and he hasn't done it in a long time, let's be honest and fair about that. Tony hasn't made too many stupid comments about WCW or Eric Bischoff and not making the same mistakes or trying to convince people that AEW is in the same position that WCW with Nitro was in 1996. He's not saying stupid shit like that anymore. He's really not. That's the only time it would become personal for me. The rest of it is just an observation, bro, from somebody that's been there and done that.
Respectfully, Eric, you're talking like a fan today.
Really?
These guys got a new television deal, which we all assume is for a new guaranteed television rights deal. That's something that almost every wrestling promoter in the world would cut their pinky off for. And you had an opportunity here today to say, hey, man, congratulations, but now the real work starts. It was a real challenge for me trying to do Nitro and Thunder, and you've already got Rampage. It's going to be a lot to juggle. He might need some more support staff, but hey, he secured the bag. Instead, you said, well, but the creative. Dude, we're talking about business, and you're talking about creative. That's
are you going to tell me they're not related?
Yes,
the business is the creative. If you don't have a great story and great characters and you're on television, you're going to go out of business.
Am I allowed to talk on this fucking show at all? I said, welcome to 83 weeks, and you vomited for 30 minutes. Can I have 2 minutes?
You asked me a question.
And then you just keep on and on and on, like one of those goddamn toys where you can pull the string in the back, but yours is in the front, and you just keep pulling.
I'm here to enlighten, not to give fucking pep talks and accolades and be a prop and a promotional opportunity.
It's not about being a promotional opportunity.
I'm here to give an observation based on experience. That's it. That's it. I'll keep my responses shorter and succinct. Congratulations, Tony. Be careful you don't step into the muck.
Listen, the idea is, like I know, 15 years ago, I don't know the timeline. Let's just guess. Whenever it was, 15 years ago, what have you, if one of these organizations approached you and said, hey, we're going to give you a boatload of cash and you got to go do a show on Saturday, figure it out, you would have done it.
I did do it, and I'm sorry for it because it was a mistake, and that's my point.
Well, here's my question, though. What could they have done this week that you would have praised? Is there anything they could have done this week? Or you said, damn, they had a home run with that. What night would have been a better night, Eric? What terms would have been better? Who should have been on the fucking poster? You're on here talking about, well, CM Punk clown show. Based on what? A report you read on a pay-per-click website? You don't know what really happened. You're the guy who rails anytime I quote the Observer. Now you're buying into that and saying, well, with what happened this week, you don't know. What are we talking about? This is a net positive. They got a lot of money for wrestling. It's good for all the wrestling.
And okay, it's good for all the wrestling. That is a fanboy response, Conrad.
You think Impact would want that?
It is not good for all of wrestling to fail at an opportunity.
How have they failed? They haven't even started.
Exactly. And keep in mind, because you tend to forget, like a lot of wrestling fans that grew up on the Tapeworms pig shit dirt site, I did come out. I congratulated Tony on this episode. Go back and listen. I congratulated Tony. It's a great opportunity for Tony. I am hoping for Tony and AEW and the roster that it is successful. And it might be. I think I said somewhere along the line in this conversation, let's wait and see. We'll find out. Hopefully I'm wrong. What is negative about that? And to suggest that creative, we shouldn't be talking about creative as it relates to a new show.
Oh my God. I think you haven't even seen the creative yet. You know, they just hired a new cat to help back there. You don't know what he can do, but they made a big hubbub.
Have we seen anything yet?
The show is a month away.
Have we seen anything in Dynamite? Have we seen anything in Dynamite consistently? Not some hot angle or guys bleeding all over each other in some fucking wacko, hardcore match. Have we seen any consistent story? Not like fanboy storytelling. I mean, legitimate storytelling that's growing the audience, because that's what happens when you come up with great creative. Your audience grows. It doesn't decline. And I have not seen a thing in AEW. Hell, the graphics they used to announce this new show was a direct ripoff of Nitro. If that's an example of the creative brain trust that's behind this strategy, whether it's a combination of Turner and Tony Khan, or Turner by themselves or Tony by themselves, that very decision to use that graphic, flattering as it may be, because imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and I am indeed flattered in some respects, but it certainly doesn't suggest to me that there's anything new coming out of this. It's going to be more of the same. And frankly, I think what is currently the same, is indie-rific and doesn't show any real opportunity for growth.
I'm so glad you said it again. Could you go ahead and name all the promotions that you believe that are running today that are not indie-rific? Go ahead.
No, I can't. There are none. It's independent wrestling with television. It's 3 steps up from backyard wrestling in some respects.
Said differently, if it ain't WWE, it's indie-rific.
Until somebody else comes along and finds a new way to present the product, something that's fresh, that we haven't seen 1,000 times before, that's produced on a large scale with high production values, that has consistently, as consistent as you can be in 52 weeks a year of programming, consistently good creative that indicates there's a team there that actually knows what they're doing and are not just throwing pig shit up against the wall and hoping it sticks. Yeah. Until somebody comes along and does it, absolutely.
There's never in the history of ever been 52-week consistent good creative.
No, there's not. And that's why I said as good as it can be with a 52-week schedule. It's not going to be great 52 weeks a year, but you can have moments. You can have a couple weeks or a couple months that really establishes great story and great character. I haven't seen that out of Dynamite.
I haven't seen you take a real objective view on AEW in a long time, and I don't understand why that is. If they sell that motherfucking Wembley Stadium out, you're going to come on here the next week and say, well, it was a bad finish. You're
full of shit. Absolutely not. I have done nothing but put over Wembley. I'm
not arguing that, but I'm saying you specifically point fingers at, well, they used to say the way we screwed the finish at Starrcade 97 with Sting, we were dead. But did you see how many people were in the Georgia dump? There's the business and the creative, and you just conflate them. You just want to change the narrative. You are Captain Goalpost Mover. That's what you do on this show every single Monday. You just move the goalpost again. Yeah, they did this, but they can't do that. Okay, they might have done this, but they won't do that. They got another freaking TV show on TNT. Like, do you don't think?
And I congratulated him for God's sake. How many times do we have to go back and listen to it together? Do you want me to post video receipts on social media?
I would love for you to do that.
I put them over and said congratulations. I have multiple times in multiple interviews on this show and on others. I think it is a vote of confidence. It is a good thing. But there is a challenge that comes with it. And so far, what I've seen out of AEW as a whole is that in terms of their infrastructure, their operational capabilities, and the depth of their operational roster, and people that really know what they're doing, suggests to me that, yes, while this is a great opportunity, and I applaud Tony for having the relationship with TBS and Turner that has provided this opportunity. That's all great. But with every great opportunity, there is a challenge. And so far, what I've seen out of AEW, organizationally, operationally, and creatively, they're not ready for this opportunity. And it could, much like Thunder did, have an adverse impact. We will find out. I may be wrong. I'll say it again. I hope I am. Unfortunately, my track record in terms of predicting things like this is pretty good. And I'm not 100% confident that this is a great idea for Tony, not because of anything but timing. And the CM Punk thing, that's an organizational issue. It's not a creative issue. And it's not just, listening to dirt sheets. There have been Brandon Thurston published the press release. I believe it was the press release that was going to announce CM Punk and he has a copy of it. It's online. You can see it from TBS, I believe, or from TNT. I believe that decision to bring Punk back, to build a show around him, or just to involve him in that show, was a mistake if they had not previously cleared up all the other mishigas that was going on and crazy shit and the legal issues that were outstanding. This is a guy that I honestly, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
This is a guy who tore his bicep and has been off injured, and they found a way to keep his name in the headlines. And if he shows up on one of these other shows and you got fucking worked, you're going to look like a goof out here talking about creative. The show,
we'll see. And you know what? I'll be happy
The show has never aired. I just don't understand how we jump to all these conclusions about this guy's not on that show. He's not on this show that was created for him. No one from Turner has ever said, boy, we gave Tony all this cash because we thought we were getting CM Punk and now we can't get him to the table. That's never
that's not what I'm saying. You're putting my words in my mouth.
Conclusion, though.
What I'm saying is that the premiere, the announcement of this show was to include CM Punk, and now it doesn't. And TBS or Turner had to come out and actually send out a press release saying CM Punk is not affiliated with the new show. You're going to tell me that's good business? That's a reflection of some great strategic thinking?
Why would you make the announcement in a press release instead of having him show up this weekend at the pay-per-view?
I'm not arguing that. If it would have been me, I would have resolved any outstanding issues I had with CM Punk. I would have cleared all of that up.
You don't know that they haven't.
I don't know that they haven't. Here's what I do know. I do know that TBS had to put out a press release saying CM Punk is not affiliated with Collision. Why would they do that?
It's creative. Because he might be on the TNT show, he might.
All right, and you know what? If that is the case, I will on the next episode, or whenever that June 17th, I think is the premiere date. If that happens, and if this is all some complex, very creative, layered, strategic, creative effort on behalf of TBS, since they're going to put out press releases on their network letterhead to convince their audience that CM Punk may not be a part of the show, and that's all part of a plan, I will be the first and the loudest person to applaud. Whether it works or not, at least there's some creative and strategic thinking there. But if that's not the case, and based on everything that we've seen out of AEW so far, I would not bet any money that that is the case. But if I'm wrong, I'll sing Tony's praises as well as Turner's, but I just don't think that's the case. I think it's just
let's make a bet. If if CM Punk is on the pay-per-view this weekend, or he's on the June 17th Collision, will you shave your head on this program with a Henson razor? While you're thinking about it, let me just tell you, if he does, he'll get the best shave of his life. I know that for a fact. I believe in Henson Shaving. It's one of my absolute favorite sponsors we've ever had on the program. It's going to be a part of my life forever. I have one in my travel bag right now. I have one at the office. I have one here at the house. I even got my barber. And think about that. She's been shaving dudes forever and ever, and now she does it with a Henson Shaving. You got to meet Henson Shaving. Now, here's what makes them different. They're family owned. You know I dig that. But they're an aerospace parts manufacturer that's made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover. And now they're bringing that same precision engineering to your face. You see, what they're doing is they're using aerospace grade CNC machines to make metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means a secure and stable blade that gives you a vibration-free shave. And it gets better. This razor has built-in channels to evacuate hair and cream, and that makes clogging virtually impossible. What I respect most about Henson Shaving is these cats wanted to make the best razor, not the best razor business. That means no plastic, no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, and no planned obsolescence. Now let me give you the heads up. Henson Razor uses a standard dual-edged blade like your grandfather used to use. That has an old school feel that you're going to love, but it has the benefits of the new school tech. You see, Pop never heard of a razor that was less thick than a human hair. And not only that, what I love most about this product is usually when something is better, well, it costs more. We all know that, right? But not only is this better than what you've been doing, Henson Razor is also cheaper. You see, it's only $3 to $5 to replace the blades. Not $3 to $5 a week, not $3 to $5 a month, not $3 to $5 a quarter, $3 to $5 a year. It's time to say no to subscriptions and say yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/83weeks to pick the razor for you and use code 83weeks, and you'll get 2 years worth of blades for free with your razor. Just be sure to add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to hensonshaving.com/83weeks and use the promo code 83weeks. And Eric, I got a real life example I want to tell you about. A listener of the show actually tweeted me not too long ago to sort of complain about the Henson razor. And he said, he showed his face and he tagged Henson and he said, "I hate your razor. This is unacceptable." And then he tagged me and said, "Hey, Conrad, I bought this on your recommendation. Now I'm regretting it." And I responded, "Dude, I love mine. What don't you like? Are you using it the right way? Do you have the blade in and all that right? I've put over 100 folks on this and always hear rave reviews back. I'm legit curious why you don't love yours." And he says, "It cuts my face like raw hamburger. And now I've got to pay for postage to send it back." And I said, "Man, no disrespect. This is user error. How else has everyone else, myself included, had such great results? Are you putting the bottom of the razor on upside down?" And he said, "I don't think so. I just followed the instructions on the box and that's what's happened. I'd love it if it works, if you said how it does, but it doesn't." And then he tried it, exactly what I suggested. And he wrote, "Holy rainbow socks, Batman. You were exactly right. I tried it your way and I had it in upside down. The first shave the right way felt amazing. Therefore, I bestow upon you the title of His Excellency, the Lord Chancellor, the Exalted Eminence of Henson Shaving. It's a fantastic product. I'm arguing about it on social media. The only way you don't have the best shave of your life is user error. But it is a razor. Be careful, y'all. Follow the instructions and you will love it. We're turning those frowns upside down. You're going to be the smoothest cat all around town. HensonShaving.com/83weeks. Use the code 83 weeks. I love this razor more than Eric Bischoff hates Tony Khan. And you know from listening to this show, that's a lot. It's HensonShaving.com/83 weeks.
You are perpetuating the myth that I hate Tony Khan. It's not a fact.
Facts, yeah.
It's not a fact.
I don't know where it comes from either.
Here's what we'll do. We'll go back to your bet. I'll take you up.
Oh,
as long as if I'm right, you do the same.
I was trying to transition to a spot. Do you want to say?
No. I take stuff personally like this. I'm committed to my beliefs and the things that I say. I stand behind them.
All right, fuck it. I'll shave.
All right, now here's the deal. Either one of us shaving our heads on camera live is not great video, right? It takes too much time. But what I will do is if I lose this bet, I will shave my head with a Henson razor. Mrs. B will take video of it and we'll post that or clips of it. And you will do the same. And yeah, let's do it. And I'll show up on this show with a shaved head if you're right and I'm wrong.
You're gonna look like Lex Luthor in this motherfucker, and I'm ready.
I just wear a fucking hat, man. It's not that big a deal. My hair grows fast. It's just hair.
I am listen, we're kidding around and having some fun about when CM Punk's gonna be back. Well, here's the thing. I'd bet everything I got that dude's at All In. There ain't no chance he's not there. He's going to be a part of it. But it doesn't make sense to spoil the return in a doggone press release. If wrestling was handled the way it is now, back in 1996, and there's all this speculation about who is the third man, and TBS or TNT put out something that says, no, Hulk Hogan's not affiliated with the NWO, these outsiders, blah, blah, blah. That's nonsense. Come on now. Let's just have a little patience and see how it plays out.
I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of that. And I try not to predict failure. I do predict challenges along the way. I do recognize patterns along the way. And if it weren't for all of the craziness surrounding Punk and the things that have gone on and the lawsuits and the threats of it and the internal drama, if it weren't for all that, I would be like you and I would believe that this is good creative. I'm a glass half full guy when it comes to this kind of stuff most of the time. But when you see the patterns that we've watched especially over the last year, I'm hoping that you're right. I just don't believe it.
All I'm saying is everybody got stirred up this week when it would be akin to Hulk Hogan's not coming to work unless we give Jimmy Hart a raise. Come on now. We'll know how much money is on the table. Let's have a little patience and figure it out.
I'm down with you on that. I hope I'm wrong. Congratulate Tony and the team. I'll say it one last time, and then we're going to switch gears here. I hope. I congratulate the team.
I like yelling at you. Let's just yell. Fuck the Horsemen. Let's just yell at each other for the rest of the show. That's fun for me.
It's actually fun for me too.
I know. Listen, it's not like you and I get to log off and then go pick a fight with the wife about, hey, supper wasn't so good last night. What are we going to do? So this is our outlet. Serious business. We're having a lot of fun. One thing we can all agree on is that the Horsemen are the original great faction in wrestling. Now, of course, we can debate, and certainly Mick Foley has debated recently on his podcast, what is the most important faction of all time. He would contend it was the Bloodline. I thought that was maybe premature. Fans agreed. NWO came in first. DX came in second. But there's always a first. And I think one of the first great factions in wrestling was the Four Horsemen. Go ahead. Debunk that. You're just in the mood to argue today.
Why are you so negative?
I'm just ready for, if I'm throwing a fastball, it should have been a curve. If I'm throwing a curveball, it should have been a slider. So I'm just teeing it up that way. I'm just ready for you to show me I'm wrong. And
no, you're just being negative. You're setting up a negative conversation. So let me just answer it. Let me solve the issue here. I agree with you. I think the Horsemen were one of the first great stables, if you will. I hate the term stable, but it is appropriate here because they're horses, right?
There you go.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. There's no question about it. Never has been in my mind. I've always recognized, well, not always, because I didn't even really hear about the Four Horsemen until I got to WCW. Because it's just not for no other reason than it was, the late 80s, early 90s, and I didn't watch NWA or Crockett Promotions. I didn't have access to it. So until I got to WCW, I had never heard of the Four Horsemen. But once I got there and learned and had an opportunity to work with Rick and Arn and some of the other people that were at one point or another, Barry Windham at one point or another part of the Four Horsemen, I began to understand it. And yes, go back and look at history and time, and particularly in their era, no question about it. Can't think of another stable that would even come close to the Four Horsemen at that time.
I'm not asking this to argue because I just want to understand. I shouldn't say we all, a lot of us listening to this have fallen in and out of love with wrestling. I was a super fan from 88 to late 92 and then took a break and then fell back in love in 96 till maybe sometime in 05 and then took a break. And now, as you can tell, I'm just way too deep. But I'm wondering, you weren't really watching wrestling on television in 85, 86, right?
No, I was. I just wasn't watching the same wrestling you were watching, but of course
I wasn't watching at all. I'm just saying they were the most watched program in the country outside of Saturday Night's Main Event, because the ratings for TBS 605 Saturday night, that outpaced Tuesday Night Titans from WWF, that outpaced Primetime Wrestling and All American Wrestling. More people were watching TBS than those because they were the first super station. They just had more access. They were in more homes than, say, a USA Network at the time. So just by nature of that, while the WWF was certainly the more pop culture and quote unquote in thing, it was the hip thing, if you will, more people were watching this because it was on a better station. And so when you come on the program and say, I didn't have access to it, I'm just wondering, what were you watching if you weren't watching this? And was that on like a local station that you could get with rabbit ears or whatever?
No, we had cable, but TBS was not part of our cable package.
Okay.
If you go back and look at TBS, because we had a very limited cable package, by the way. But if you go back and look at TBS, their footprint, well, everything you said is true. First Superstation, there's a lot of things that you said that are absolutely true. But it's not completely true because there were pockets in the country where TBS, while it even may have been available, nobody watched it.
Right.
It was predominantly a southeastern footprint for a long time. Even with the launch of Nitro, one of the challenges that we had was even TNT, as successful as TNT was and broad as it was, didn't have a lot of the penetration. Was it available? And that's where people get a little messed up sometimes. Just because something is available doesn't mean people watch it. There's a lot of things that are available on my 385 channels that I don't watch. And TBS in the market that Minneapolis that I lived in was just not something people tuned into. Southeast, yes. And there were some parts of the country where it did. What I'm saying is whether it was available and I never discovered it because I'd never heard of it and wasn't interested in the Braves or any of the other, or Andy Mayberry or even WCW early on, I wasn't aware of it. It just wasn't on my radar, nor was it on the radar of most people. The average hardcore wrestling fans, yeah, maybe Wade Keller was into it. You know, he was writing about wrestling and following it. And I'm sure there were fans in that market that were. In fact, I think AWA promoted in the Minneapolis market. It just wasn't on my radar. That's all. That's why I didn't hear about the Four Horsemen until I really kind of got embedded into WCW and learned the culture and where it came from.
We should remind everybody that this original OG version of the group, man, it does feel a little bit like the NWO did once upon a time. Of course, we're talking about from a championship perspective. Ric Flair was your world champion, much like Hollywood Hogan was later. And Tully Blanchard was your TV champion, much like they had a variety of U.S. champions in the NWO, or whether it's 6 for the Cruiserweight title. And then Ole and Arn are the tag team champs, just like the Outsiders. So I really like, you know, the idea of creating a dominant stable, and there's maybe no better way to signify and solidify their dominance than to make them all champions, right? I mean, that especially in this era, because the idea is you wanted heel champions and the baby faces chasing, so it could always be on the live events, so-and-so's getting a title shot, you know, whoever your new hot baby face is. And I think that's one of the reasons that the NWO worked. And of course, the NWO was a stable with a twist because we made them cool and they weren't just bad guys. But you could even argue, maybe perhaps, that the Four Horsemen were trying to be cool, because if you watch some of those old TBS shows, you'll see kids in the front row or adolescents, young men dressing up in suits and holding up the 4 fingers. It's interesting to see how that dynamic has evolved over time.
I agree. I'm not sure how to comment on that. It is interesting. There's this feeling, and it's like your conversation with Mick Foley, you know, asking Mick what he thinks the most influential faction of all time was. His pick was the Bloodline. I guess, well, he could be right. I'm not seeing that now. I mean, I think the Bloodline in its story, and I was one of the biggest, at least vocally, podcasts, I was one of the biggest fans of it. I sent texts to the people involved and congratulated them, and I was generally enthusiastic about it. But it's kind of, at this point, it was a big buildup, and we had WrestleMania, and we'll have to see where that goes. But did it change the industry? Are we seeing Bloodline merchandise, you know, in non-wrestling environments? Maybe we are. I'm not, but you know, I live in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, so it's understandable. But I just think it's a little early. But everybody has a particular opinion based on what they like and they dislike. I think the Four Horsemen, they were first. They were long before the NWO. I think your point about the heel champions and the parallels between some of the members of the NWO are right on the money. I think the reason the NWO, in the eyes of the fans and the people that vote on silly things like this, I think the reason the NWO is arguably the most successful faction, at least at this point of all time, was because it actually changed the industry. It wasn't a marketing point. And a lot of it has to do with timing.
Yeah.
And all of the circumstances that surrounded the launch of NWO was very freaking unique. And it's had a lasting impact. Have we seen yet to date, other than the Bloodline, and I think the jury's still out on that, anything that comes close to the overall impact that the NWO has had on wrestling and television? I don't think so.
I'll tell you what, I don't think I don't think it's even close that the NWO is number one. And the reason why, throw that graphic up against Silva of the NWO, it's the t-shirt. And I know that sounds really, really silly. And a lot of people will think I'm trying to be argumentative or funny, but I mean it legitimately. There's not a cooler t-shirt in wrestling history. Now you could argue Austin 316. I'll give you that, but that's not a faction. The Four Horsemen didn't have a shirt like this. Today, the Bloodline don't have a shirt like this. And the DX shirt was just not as cool as this. I mean, yeah, it had the Degeneration X logo on the front, but then it said "Suck It" on the back, and man, that's kind of lame. This is a cool shirt then, now, forever. And the thing that separates it above all, yes, it did change because you did an invasion angle. That was great creative. High five on that. You turned the biggest superstar in the history of wrestling into a bad guy. That's never happened before. That was awesome. High five for that. You made them super cool. High five for that. But really, most of all, man, just to show that brand support and that loyalty. And it's not like, hey, I like that guy, so I'm going to buy that shirt. It's, hey, this is a fucking cool shirt. I mean, to the point where these days we see people on the runway. So, I mean, like fashion shows, they're rocking NWO shirts. Like that's never happened for DX or the Horsemen or the Bloodline. And I don't think it ever will. That's what makes the NWO the number one all time, in my opinion. As silly as it sounds, that freaking t-shirt, dude. What a boom that was.
I think the t-shirt was the logo and
the
imagery, all of the, and I agree with you. I don't know that I agree with you 100%. I think the logo, the merchandise was a reflection of the attitude and the character of NWO as a whole, not of any one individual, but as a whole. It was anarchy. It was, let's turn this shit upside down. It was deep down inside everything that people wanted to be. Everybody wanted to be able to tell their boss to bite it. Everybody wanted to, deep down inside, it was just, it was a cultural thing as much as it was a wrestling angle. It just tapped into a psyche. And again, not by design. I didn't sit in the room and go, oh, I think people have this deep down inside. They really want to be like this character. I didn't think that. It just became obvious after a point. But again, it was timing. I think the logo is a big part of it, but the logo was a reflection of an attitude that was the NWO as a whole, not any one individual. And you look, I've said it before, I'm not going to beat it up. You could wear that t-shirt out anywhere. It's like going to a NASCAR event, folks. If you're going to a NASCAR event and you're wearing your favorite driver's merchandise and you got the hat on, the t-shirt on, your cooler's got logos all over it, you fit right in. You're cool. Everybody, boom, part of the family, right? NASCAR fan family. But if you wear that same merchandise out anywhere into a restaurant, you're going to look like a geek. And that's part of the problem with wrestling merchandise today. It really hasn't changed much. It's also talent image intensive. And if you're an 18 to 49-year-old guy and you're going out to have a cocktail, hang out with your friends, and maybe meet somebody new, you're not going to wear wrestling merchandise out because you stand out. I mean, you're not going to do that. You know why you're not going to do that. But the NWO merchandise, like if you're a wrestling fan, you're part of the wrestling family, the fan family. But if you're not a wrestling fan, you see that NWO shirt, you don't think the person wearing it's a geek because you don't really relate to it. You don't know what it is. It's just a cool, simple black and white design.
Well, and what's cool about it to me is even when the creative for the NWO wasn't maybe what it once was, when the wheels started to come off and it's just not as cool and it's not as hot, the shirt was still cool. It's still cool. Of course, we're talking about the Horsemen today, and they were on fire in late 85, and certainly 86 was the biggest year in Crockett's run. 87, the wheels started to come off a little bit, but not because of the creative for the Horsemen, although the folks participating in the Horsemen did change. We would see Ole move out, and then we would see some other cats come in like Lex Luger and Barry Windham. So it just continued to evolve, much like a lot of other factions, whether it was DX or certainly the NWO. But it really sort of disbands for a bit when Rick comes to an impasse with WCW and he's out of there, he's going to leave guys like Arn behind. And I guess actually, you know, it really wasn't the same when Arn and Tully left for the WWF. I mean, we talk about this a lot sometimes in our whereas we're talking about old WCW stuff, but as much as the Horsemen were a Ric Flair property, they were an Arn Anderson property too. I mean, that's sort of, I think when people think about the NWO, they usually say Hogan, Hall, and Nash, and yourself and Waltman. But I think a lot of people consider the pillars like the first two guys, right? So it's Hall and Nash in that order. It feels like with the Horsemen, if Arn isn't there and if Flair isn't there, it's just not the same. You agree with that?
I couldn't agree with you anymore. And that's that's another parallel, right? I think part of the success, and again, I wasn't there and I wasn't watching, so this is just, you know, obviously hindsight. But looking at it today, I think Ric Flair and Arn Anderson had that buddy cop chemistry that individually, yes, they were successful, they were powerful, they had great value, particularly Rick, just because of the way he was positioned. But that combination of Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, not taking away from Tully or even Ole Anderson, but Ric Flair and Arn Anderson brought the believability, credibility, and legitimacy to it. If you would have taken Rick out of the equation and tried to launch a Four Horsemen, I don't think we'd be talking about it today. The original Four Horsemen. If Arn would not have been in that equation, I don't think we would have talked about it. Not because Rick didn't have great value, but that combination of Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, to me, is what made everything else work. And without it, you take one of those components out of it, you're going to lose a lot of value, brand value.
Hey, Silva, throw that photo up of the Horseman in the cul-de-sac again. Rick, Eric, you ever sport some of those nut huggers that you see Tully and Arn wearing there?
You know, I wasn't even going to point that out. I was just going to let that go.
Well, let me just say, if you're listening to this, at the Arn Show on Twitter, whatever you do, don't start spamming that photo to Arn. He doesn't like the nut hugger photo. I may have said too much. Don't let everybody know that you've seen it and you like those shorts and maybe he should wear them on Dynamite. Don't do that.
Mr. Silva, could we put that up once again just to make sure I don't inadvertently tweet this out on social media or send it to Arn or anything like that?
We don't want Arn to see this, and we don't want all of you to let Arn know that you saw that. Eric, do you see over Rick's left shoulder, our right, the far right? See that four-wheeler in the background?
Yeah.
So when this photo first popped up again and started getting circulated a handful of years ago, I said, hey, look at this cool old photo of the Horseman. I showed my wife, Megan, and she zooms in. She goes, hey, look at my four-wheeler in the back. That was Rick's house in the background.
Oh, wow.
They're in the cul-de-sac there. They had all just gotten their new rides. You see them leaning on some new Mercedes and stuff. And the stories of these guys making a bunch of money and going down to the Mercedes dealer together and loading up, that's all true. And you see all the gold there, the national title, the TV title, the world title. But yeah, man, I think we need to get you on stage and some of those nut huggers. I mean, you used to model. If we had a line of 83 weeks nut huggers sponsored by Manscaped, I think we could make that work. What do you think? You going to sport some of those?
No.
All right. Well, listen, if you're thinking about it, because it is summertime, can I recommend Manscaped enough? Friends, family, loved ones. I bet you haven't purchased a Father's Day gift yet, have you? Well, not to fear. The leaders in below the waist grooming are here. I'm talking about our friends at Manscaped. They're saving the day yet again with the total package. Not talking about Lex Luger. The total package for the father figure in your life this year. It's time to upgrade his game from waist to face with this exclusive offer. Have him join the 8 million men who've joined the NWO. I mean, the Manscaped World Order. And get 20% off plus free shipping with the code 83weeks at manscaped.com. Eric, I think I just came up with something. Are we going to start our own MWO, Manscaped World Order? The guys who are...
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I think that's a good idea. It's already the color scheme. They're already rocking black and white. The MWO, that's what we need. MWO nut hugger shorts. And you can let it hang because you don't have anything that you can't tuck away. All right, here's the deal. Let's start with Dad. Let's take care of Dad. It's the MVP of Father's Day. It's the Performance Package 4.0. I have it on good authority. That's what Rick used to call his gimmick back in the day before it was Space Mountain, the Performance Package. Now, inside this, you'll find the Lawnmower 4.0. It's a brand new trimmer that you're going to need if you're rocking those nut huggers. And they've got the brand new Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose hair trimmer. They had to do a 2.0 because everybody who's close to Rick knows his nickname is Beak, and he wore out the first one. So he needed a second one. It's the 2.0. It's good to go. And if you could see Tully and the nut huggers there, you know my man knew all about the Crop Preserver ball deodorant. And if we could get a shot of JJ, you'll notice that he's wearing long pants. That means he needed the Crop Reviver toner. You don't want those boys hitting the water. The Performance Boxer briefs are exactly what Dad needs. And how about a shed travel bag to hold his goodies? It's all inside the Performance Package 4.0. And how could we forget the moneymaker? Let's throw that photo up there of Arn Anderson again. Look at that beard he's rocking there. Look at how groomed that is. You know how much time he had to spend on it to get that line like that? Let me tell you, it's a lot. You can save a lot of time, though, with the new Manscaped Beard Hedger Pro Kit. Not only that, you can hook Dad up with the Beard Hedger trimmer, the beard shampoo and conditioner, the beard oil, the beard balm, and 2 free gifts like the beard comb and the scissors. Now, let me just tell you, if you're in a serious business meeting, and maybe it's a negotiation, and you get to that awkward silence, and you reach in your desk and you pull out your mustache comb and you start doing that, those guys are going to freak the fuck out and go with you. The confidence that you have to comb your fucking beard and mustache in front of them during a business deal, they're just going to submit. I do it all the time. And we know dads love their comfort. And if his grooming routine is already dialed in, man, hook my man up with the boxers. Without a doubt, the best boxers any man could ever ask for, no matter his age. Whether homeboys mowing the lawn or taking out the trash or golfing in the sun, these moisture-wicking boxers breathe without breaking a sweat. Get 20% off with the code 83weeks at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code 83weeks and make this Father's Day one he won't forget with Manscaped. Join the MWO. You'll be in it for life.
I love this. I think we need to come out with some MWO. I can't wait to, I'm just going to be curious how long it takes for us to get a cease and desist, but let's go for it.
Well, here's the thing. If we start doing it, we're really promoting their brand at manscaped.com using promo code 83weeks. But imagine, let's just imagine, boys and girls, you find yourself at a bar over the summer. Maybe it's a beach bar. Maybe it's a bar on the lake. Everybody's outside doing outdoor activities, and you cruise in. All the ladies are wearing their bikinis, right? But you got your tank top on or your sleeveless tee or your t-shirt, and it says Manscaped World Order. Now they know what they're signing up for. Come on now. Crazy like a fox. Manscaped.com. Use the promo code 83weeks.
That is pretty brilliant, actually.
I mean, that ain't bad, right? I'm just saying. Listen, let's talk about Ole Anderson. He's one of the founding members of the Four Horsemen. He's the first guy to get kicked out of the Four Horsemen, but he's also someone who's going to have some influence creatively when you're there in WCW. And by and large, a lot of times WCW would go back to the well with this Four Horsemen idea. Was Ole a proponent of that, or did he do it reluctantly? Did he see value in it? What do you remember about the relationship? We'll call it in the 90s, early 90s with Ole, and should we or shouldn't we do something with the Horsemen again?
I don't know. I don't know what Ole's creative involvement was prior to me getting involved in management, so I couldn't honestly tell you. I did work with Ole, was involved with when I first was made executive producer, when I had nothing to do with creative and I was only in charge of the physical production of the show. I know that Ole was there. He was involved in creative, but what influence or what his view of the Four Horsemen and how he was involved in trying to bring them back, I couldn't honestly tell you.
Let's talk about something that happens while you're there. I know you're not handling creative. You're involved in more of the television side of things. But when Flair comes back from his little jaunt with the World Wrestling Federation, we're going to start a Flair for the Gold, which is essentially his talk show vehicle, much like maybe the Piper's Pit or whatever, the barbershop, the funeral parlor. Now it's the WCW side of things. So we're going to call it Flair for the Gold. decent little idea, possibly a workaround because I don't think he could do in-ring action, but he could still appear on the program. He just couldn't wrestle on TV. And they make the decision, hey, let's get the band back together. You know, let's do this. Let's get the Horsemen back together. And the idea is we'll have all the guys there, including Tully Blanchard. And then that doesn't work. At the last minute, there's a change of heart. Can't come to terms on a new deal. So we need to scramble to find, because we love the idea of bringing back the Horsemen. So if we can't get Tully, well, just like we had to once upon a time with Ole, we'll just find a new member. And the person chosen is Paul Roma. And this has become, all these years later, still something that's controversial and discussed. And old school Crockett fans just absolutely hated it. Even Rick wrote this in his book. Meanwhile, Dusty Rhodes became the booker. One of his first acts was regrouping the Four Horsemen with myself, Arn, Ole, and Paul Roma. Basically, Paul had been a very lower tier guy in the World Wrestling Federation who'd gotten a moderate push there. In my opinion, he also had a shitty work ethic and once leaving an opponent waiting in the ring so he could finish up a game of cards. As soon as Roma's name was announced in Atlanta, the Omni went silent. It never ends, I thought. Here's Dusty screwing with me again. A lot to unpack there about Rick and Dusty. We'll table that for now. As a fan, I actually really enjoyed Power and Glory over in the WWF. They were a guilty pleasure of mine. That's Paul Roma and Hercules Hernandez. I know you probably weren't watching the WWF at the time, Eric, but they would do a superplex off the top rope. Hercules would. And then here comes Paul Roma with the big splash. Eventually, we would see FTR even use that a little bit in the WWE. I love that finish. I like the presentation. I didn't perceive him to be a quote-unquote job guy or a very low-tier guy or whatever the phrase that Rick used. But I know that, man, it looks like all these years later, Rick and Roma are just not on the same page. They don't respect each other. You didn't see the heyday of the Horsemen, but you had to know, hey, everybody ain't happy about this idea. What do you remember about the Paul Roma experiment?
I mean, obviously, I was there for it. I watched it. I didn't work with Dusty in creative, so that really was a Dusty Rhodes decision and idea. And I certainly couldn't begin to explain how or why Dusty decided that it was a good idea. You know, I think if you just kind of step back and pull yourself out of the history and the politics of it and just look at it from a casting perspective, you know, Paul Roma did have exposure in WWE. That was valuable. You can, as a wrestling fan, you can discount it if you want and resent it. In many cases, wrestling fans do. But you cannot undervalue the idea that someone from WWE, as lower on the card as they may be, were getting significantly more exposure within a company that had significantly more express and brand value than WCW did at the time. So bringing somebody in that has had that exposure to the wrestling world, wrestling audience, I understand the logic of it. I didn't know Paul Roma. I had no, to this day, couldn't talk about his work ethic or anything like that. But Rick clearly had an issue with him. And right off the bat, you've got a chemistry problem, right? That you got four guys together and not everybody's on the same page. So I can understand why Dusty made the decision. You know, I mean, even just aesthetically, you know, Roma had a great look. He had a great physique. He had a great, you know, camera loved him. There's a lot of reasons why I could see why Dusty made the decision, but having not known Paul Roma previously, or certainly not knowing him at the time, not sure what led to that decision.
Years later, the WWE would produce a Four Horsemen documentary DVD, and Roma would be quoted as saying something like, "Flair wanted to be me, but never could." It's always going to be contentious with those guys. And this incarnation of the Horsemen just never works. Ole is on TV for very little of it. You'll see Rick and Arn team up against the Hollywood Blondes. You'd even see Arn and Roma team up. They're kind of positioned as baby faces. I always felt like, you know, they were probably better served as heels, but this is a Dusty idea as Rick laid it out. And I wonder, is it just maybe Dusty didn't have a better idea? Like, you got Rick coming back. What do we do with him? Well, let's go with what we know. Let's go with what works. And that's something that a lot of people do creatively, like, because you think you're going to get that nostalgia pop, and then maybe it just doesn't work here.
It's always a risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
You bringing someone back or recreating something that existed before. It's hardly ever as good as the original. That's a challenge with anything. It doesn't matter what it is. When you come up with a great idea in any form of entertainment and you're the first one to the dance, when you can plant your flag and be the first with a new idea or a new group or whatever, a new character, there's real value there. But once you've done it, trying to recreate it, I think you're going to almost always come up short, because it's never as good as the first edition is perceived to be.
Yeah. Maybe short term, you're excited to see it back once, but then
like being the second man on the moon would be a great opportunity, right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to get the attention as being the first man on the moon.
No, it is not.
And the same thing is true creatively. That's a risk you run with bringing shit back, because you expect you're going to get the kind of reaction that you previously enjoyed, and the audience just isn't thrilled with it as much.
It's interesting to see how, the Horsemen would sort of evolve as a creative piece, because, they're the top storyline when they're first created in the mid 80s. But by the time we try in the early to mid 90s, it's not quite the same. And the Horseman gimmick pretty much comes to an end when Arn and Sid have their incident over in England. Roma starts teaming up with Paul Orndorff as Pretty Wonderful. Flair's back on his own. And it's kind of interesting to think that maybe what changed that all again is Starrcade 93. Everybody knows about the bonanza that Starrcade 83 was, the granddaddy of them all. It predated WrestleMania. They shut down traffic. They turned away thousands of fans. And now, because of the Sid incident, he's out for Starrcade. But it's in Charlotte. Let's get the old man in there. So Rick gets in there with Vader. It does the highest gross of the year for the company from a ticket standpoint. And sooner rather than later, we're starting to think about, hey, what if we bring back the Horsemen and do something else? And we all know the story. In 94, Hulk comes into the company, and he's going to eat up Flair because he's the guy that they trust, and he's going to become world champion and retire Rick. And then Rick, of course, makes a comeback a few months later. And the evolution of how we get back to the Horsemen again, I think, happens in 95. Now, by that point, you're more in control of everything that's going on, but you're still not as hands-on creatively. So I'm wondering, in that era, do you think that's Rick getting with Kevin Sullivan maybe to talk about, hey, what if we did something new?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. Obviously, Rick would be able to answer that better than I. But I did support it. I loved the idea of it. Of refreshing it. So I was very supportive of it, but I couldn't imagine what the conversation was between Rick and Kevin Sullivan, but clearly that's where the power lied, right? I gave Rick a lot of rope. I had so much confidence in Rick and his experience and his outlook on things at that point in time that, I fully supported it, but I couldn't tell you whose idea it was originally.
At Bash of the Beach 95, which we're going to cover at some point, Hogan defeats Vader in a steel cage, and eventually Flair comes in, lambasts Vader. Vader gets on the attack, and Arn comes in to save Rick. And that looks like we're beginning, to put those guys back together, at least on screen. Vader beats them both in a handicap match at Clash of the Champions, but that starts to create some divide between Flair and Arn on camera. And we even get a singles match at Fall Brawl where Arn defeats Flair one-on-one. a dream come true for Arn Anderson, I'm sure. He's admitted on his podcast he was so nervous beforehand he threw up. I mean, he's really wrestling.
Why? What? Why?
The pressure was always there because he's wrestling his best friend, his real life best friend. Like my wife grew up calling Arn Uncle Arn. That's not even his name, but that was what she called him. And so that's where they are. And so now there's this pressure of, if he doesn't perform, what is this going to look like? And
you know what's so weird about that is, can you imagine Arn Anderson having a bad match?
No, I don't think he could today. He'd still figure out a way to make it work.
But what's interesting here is, at this point in time, Arn Anderson, who is, I think, unquestionably, if you talk about the top 5 technical wrestlers of all time, I don't know how Arn Anderson isn't in that conversation right up at the very top, along with Bret Hart. And I'm sure many others or others, but Arn, I don't think he could have a bad match with anybody. And now Ric Flair, who could have a match literally with anybody and make it entertaining and look good. How could Arn not have that confidence in himself? So to the extent that he got so nervous, he threw up. I don't know. It's interesting. And I understand the personal relationship was a big part of that. There was a lot on the line, but it's just an interesting thing to hear that Arn was so nervous about that when he was so gifted, and he was in the ring with a guy who was equally as gifted, if not more so. And by the way, both of them loved each other and wanted to make each other look good. What's there to be nervous about? But I understand.
I totally agree. I get it. Ultimately, Arn gets the win, though, with a little help from Brian Pillman. So now see what we're doing here. Flair was in trouble. Arn makes the save. They team up against the guy who was beating on Rick, and that guy beats him, but they both blame each other for the loss. They settle it in a singles match, but Arn can't help himself. He gets a little help from Brian Pillman. So now it looks like it's Arn and Brian Pillman versus Ric Flair. Flair needs a tag team partner. He's got to have somebody to help take care of Arn and Pillman. So who does he go to? He goes to one of his greatest rivals, but also a former member of the Four Horsemen, Sting. And Sting, as he always did, got suckered in. At Halloween Havoc, Sting finally makes the hot tag to Flair. Flair struts around, nails Sting with a right hand. Boom. They all beat the shit out of Sting. It's just great stuff, man. It's great storytelling. I absolutely love this angle. The big reveal. Hey, we're back together. You thought I wasn't with my best friend. You're wrong. And I'm wondering the timing of this, just to let everybody know where we're at. It's around the same time that Nitro's launching. Of course, that was at Halloween Havoc. Nitro launched just a couple of months prior. Whoever is helping chart the course felt like, hey, this might be good for business. Let's let everybody know the Horsemen are back. I mean, that nostalgia thing, it's a real thing.
It always works.
Yeah.
Let me just say, it can always work.
Yes.
But you have to be careful with it. It's not easy. You can't assume a lot. You can't take anything for granted. You have to put some real thought into bringing back a nostalgia act and find ways to freshen it up and give the act a new perspective, a different perspective, a different personality, if you will, a different motivation, all the things that go into creating any kind of a good story. And I think in this case, Rick and Kevin Sullivan, working together or individually, however it came about, were right on the money, especially with Pillman. That was an edge and a freshness that I think bringing back a nostalgia act needed.
Now let's talk about the new added wrinkle, Chris Benoit. Do you know why Chris was a good fit here, or who would have helped make that call? I mean, we know that he's going to have an interesting, to say the least, relationship with Kevin Sullivan, but I mean, I know from a work rate standpoint, the dude could go. I'm just curious, why do you think Chris became the guy?
Because I think if you look at, and no disrespect to Brian's style was a much more dynamic, kind of athletic, aerial kind of presentation. You look at Arn and Rick, they were the professional wrestling version of ground and pound. They were technical wrestlers. They flamboyant as Rick may have been, on his way to the ring, and his character outside of the ring may have been. Inside of the ring, he was traditional wrestling. He was what most people who grew up watching wrestling in the 60s, in the 70s, or in the 80s recognized as a real professional wrestler. Arn, same, maybe even a little more so, because Arn didn't have the flamboyance, right? He didn't have that. He wasn't coming to the ring dressed like, looking like a peacock with the glitter and the fly and the boas and the sequence. Arn was he's just coming to the ring to take care of business, and he had so much credibility. And then you look at Chris Benoit, it's like he was right out of the Arn Anderson mold. While he had that flying headbutt, he did have some aerial stuff. Chris was that basic foundational ground and pound, if you will, version of a professional wrestler that just had so much credibility. And it's like they were related.
Right.
You know what I mean? There was so much similarities in their presentation and their credibility that Chris Benoit was just probably the best casting that had, from my perspective at least, for the Four Horsemen post its original inception. He brought, unlike Paul Roma, who didn't bring a lot of, he brought a Q rating. He got that recognition within the WWE world that Dusty, I'm sure, was trying to take advantage of, and he should have. But Paul Roma didn't have that character. He didn't have that vibe, that intangible quality that made him fit. He was almost too pretty, right? Didn't work. But Chris Benoit, he was just serious as a heart attack, so credible, and his presentation was so similar that it was a perfect casting.
Woman who we don't talk about enough these days in wrestling. She's going to return and become a manager, and as crazy as it sounds, they're one of the top heel factions. Them, and believe it or not, Dungeon of Doom. That's a real thing. So that means they're going to be working with the other top baby faces, which at the time are Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Sting, and Lex Luger. Of course, Sting and Lex Luger, very familiar with the Horsemen, but now you've got the top guys from the other channel, Hogan and Savage, on the roster here. Let's talk about Super Brawl. Perhaps it's most well known for that infamous Brian Pillman and Kevin Sullivan, I respect you, Booker Man thing. We've talked about that a lot in the past in our archives over at 83 Weeks on YouTube.com. But do you know what a guy like Arn Anderson thought of this loose cannon persona that Pillman was trying? Do you think maybe it took away from the group, or did everybody see it as, hey man, controversy creates cash?
I don't know what was in Arn Anderson's mind. I don't think he and I ever spoke about it. And I'm sure Arn had a strong opinion, but Arn was, how do I define my relationship with Arn? Arn was, in so many respects, an ideal person to have on your roster, because you knew he was going to deliver. You knew he was going to work hard. And let's, be honest here. Arn had some baggage, right? But not inside of the ring or in the venue. Once he got to the building, he was all business. But he and I never really spoke much creatively. I never went to Arn and asked his opinion. Not that I can remember. I may have, but it would have been kind of courtesy or in passing. And Arn certainly never came to me. He was very respectful in that regard. He never came to me if he had an issue. He probably worked through Rick or Kevin Sullivan, which is, by the way it should be done. Especially at that time when I wasn't really in charge of, I was in charge of creative, but I wasn't running it. Arn was extremely professional in that regard. So if he had issues or concerns, he didn't express them to me. He probably did to Kevin Sullivan, and probably most likely to Rick, but not to me.
Well, listen, what's not often talked about, because that's such a big moment, the whole I respect you, Booker Man thing at Super Brawl. Later that night, Flair wins the world title from Randy Savage. So he's on top of the company. And the following night on Nitro, Arn Anderson beat Hulk Hogan. Now it took Miss Elizabeth's heel in his eye, but still.
Doesn't matter.
You got to win over Hulk Hogan? Are you kidding? Like, the Horsemen are back on top again, on the way to Uncensored. We should point to the Nitro in Chattanooga in March. It's something that maybe is undersold in history here. He's in Chattanooga. It's a Nitro. And he's booed very loudly during this promo. The fans are not Hulk Hogan fans. They're not here to see Hulk Hogan. And it almost seems like for the first time, because there have been, some boos here and there since the early 90s. Like, oh, it's for the kids, it's for the women, it's for the families. And some of the hardcore adult male wrestling fans, boo. That's always been there. Mm-hmm. This is the first time it feels like it really gets to Hogan visibly. Do you remember seeing him? I'm talking about Hulk Hogan now, pronouns pal, where the boos maybe shook him a little bit in this era. I'm not talking about, recent stuff. I'm saying way back when he's supposed to be the top guy and the top baby face. And there's never been enough boos that it really felt like it got to him. But this Nitro in Chattanooga, it feels like it does a little bit. You remember seeing something like that?
Sure. And I remember it. It's one of the reasons why, a year before Hulk Hogan actually turned heel, in 96, I had gone to Hulk's house to talk to him about turning heel because the babyface thing wasn't working. And Hulk would never, I never saw it. I never saw him react. I never saw him sell or even do anything that made me believe while he was making his entrance or while he was in the ring that it was getting to him at all. But it seemed like even before this event in Chattanooga, even at center stage, when he'd make an appearance, you get that initial reaction from a lot of the fans. And after the newness the new car smell kind of wore off and Hulk had been around for a while, you started out very subtle, not that noticeable on camera, but when you're standing there, when you're backstage or when you're, near the floor, you can hear it, see it. And I started hearing it and seeing it more and more and more, not all of a sudden, but progressively over time. And at this point, for sure. And it was one of the reasons why I felt like this red and yellow thing isn't really working to the extent that we wanted it to. It was still working strategically, business-wise, business to business, tremendous value. But the crowd reaction was becoming more and more obvious that a larger and larger part of the audience wasn't reacting the way Hulk wanted them to, and certainly not the way I wanted them to. And when I would notice it, I think to answer your question better, it was backstage.
Right.
There's a difference between going out, you get that great reaction, you have your match, you get a great, you cup the ear, do all the things that Hulk did in the pose. And that's it makes you feel good. You come back and, Hulk would be, higher than a kite. But when you come backstage and you're getting, you're starting to sense that the audience isn't with you to the same extent, you don't have that same attitude coming backstage. You're not on the same adrenaline high that you would have been otherwise. And that became noticeable over time.
Let's also remind everybody that same show in Chattanooga, the main event is Hogan and Savage as a tag team. That's right. They're former mega powers, but 7 years later, here teaming up against Flair and Kevin Sullivan in a Texas Tornado match. And that's not very Horseman-like to be joining the Horsemen with the Dungeon of Doom, but these are the two top heels, and fans are cheering for the Horsemen. And we know that eventually we're going to see a change with Hogan. But I want to remind everybody, this era with Hogan now not in the title picture, it's Flair and Savage. Them working the house shows are really something that turns house show business around for WCW before the NWO. Now, there's no denying the NWO took it to a whole new level. But prior to this Flair Savage house show run, house shows were drawing, and this is real, 700 to 1,500 fans. Not good. That's like what GCW is probably beating that this weekend. Now, with Flair on top, working with Savage for the world title, they're doing between 1,800 and 3,200 fans. So we're proving that Flair's still a little bit of a draw, even if, you know, he has been killed off dead. What happens, though, next creatively is the alliance to end Hulkamania. So now it's not.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry.
Sure.
You said that despite the fact that Rick was killed off. How?
Well, he lost a retirement match and went away and all that stuff.
Okay.
So I'm just saying we're on the heels. So this is 95, and at Halloween Havoc 94, he lost a retirement match. So it feels as if, okay, I mean, I think most people thought when he lost a retirement match, and I know no retirements in wrestling are real, but I think the original plan was, okay, we'll have you gone for X number of months or whatever. When he's inserted back in, it's almost like he picks up right where he left off. Like, that's in the rear view. Doesn't matter. We're going forward now. And I think that's interesting because I think in mixed martial arts, and I realize we're comparing apples and pomegranates, I'll never forget when Chuck Liddell first lost, or when Ronda Rousey first lost, or when Conor McGregor first lost. People were just really quick to say, oh, their appeal's over. The mystique is gone. They're not a draw anymore. That's not the way it works. Like when someone is a fan of yours, they're a fan of yours. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't hurt you to lose because now they want to see, can you overcome? And I just think that narrative that, well, he lost the world title. Well, he lost a match. Well, he lost a retirement match. That doesn't mean people quit caring, right?
Not if you're a great character and you've
right.
established a relationship with the audience. No, I think way too much is made of that. Way too much is made of that.
The alliance to end Hulkamania. Boy, this is right out of the book of bad ideas. We got the Horsemen teaming up with the Dungeon of Doom. And I'm not saying this is the best version of the Horsemen, but I don't even know what we would call the best version of a Dungeon of Doom. Maybe one that didn't exist. But it's a Tower of Doom steel cage match with the likes of Z Gangsta. So we can't call him Zeus anymore. Hogan's rival from the 1989 movie No Holds Barred. The Ultimate Solution, who we know from a Batman movie. And then Hogan and Savage are going to fight through Lex Luger, Kevin Sullivan, the Barbarian, Ming, and eventually Arn and Flair. This might be the most unhorseman-like thing of all time. I'm sure they weren't tickled to be here. Hey, it's a pay-per-view main event. It's a lot of eyeballs, but if we had this one to do over again, you probably wouldn't do that match, right?
I wouldn't think so. But
yeah,
again, Kevin and Rick were working very closely together. I don't know that. I mean, Rick, I would love to hear from Rick on this subject, but in terms of how he felt about going into this particular match, I don't know that Rick was against it. Maybe. But since he was so close to Kevin Sullivan, if Rick was unhappy with it, I'm kind of shocked that it would have happened.
Right.
They had a good creative working relationship. There's a lot of mutual respect there between them. The idea to me sounds very Hogan-esque.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and Kevin Sullivan and Hulk also had a very good relationship. So I can kind of see in my mind, at least, how this all came together. And I think there was a tremendous amount of Hogan influence in this creative strategy.
When it's all said and done, Randy Savage gets the pin on Ric Flair. It would have been really easy for Randy Savage to pin, I don't know, Kevin Sullivan or Lex Luger or the Barbarian or Ming or Zeus or Ultimate Solution, but Rick didn't have a problem listening to Randy, I'm sure. And that turns into the Horsemen of the Dungeon of Doom pairing off against each other. As we know, Pillman's going to exit the company. Benoit's going to take his spot in the feud with Kevin Sullivan. That doesn't end well for anyone. And Flair randomly drops the WCW title to the Giant on Nitro in late April. This feels as if we had some confidence in the Horsemen, but maybe now with Pillman peeling out, and we're going to take the belt off of Flair, it feels like, hey, we're trying to do something new. Was there a time where you felt like the Horsemen could have become a bigger deal here, or was it more about we need some Sarsa? Let's get the belt on a new cat let's put it on the Giant?
I think it was both. I wasn't a fan of putting the belt on the Giant, but I went along with it, supported it. I think you're probably right. I think it was more of a reaction to Pillman leaving than a thought process. And I think it's unfortunate because I think the Four Horsemen, in hindsight's just such a wonderful fucking thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think in hindsight, it would have been better to keep the Horsemen together and to focus on it and build it up than to just quickly move on, drop the title to Giant, which I'm sure there was some logic behind it. I don't know how good it was, but there was, I'm sure, a reason for it. It wasn't just a random idea somebody came up with. But I think there was a missed opportunity there. No doubt a missed opportunity.
We should talk about with Pillman gone, there's a hole that needs to be filled. So who's it going to be? Mongo. That happens at Great American Bash. Flair and Arn are teaming up to take on Kevin Green and Steve McMichael. As you might imagine, Mongo opens up the Halliburton that was handed to him by his wife, Deborah. It's filled with money and a Horseman t-shirt. Mongo joins right up. And this has been something that a lot of fans have been critical of, saying Mongo wasn't the wrestler that a lot of the other Horsemen were, and he wasn't the performer. And well, if you ask Ric Flair, Rick says, man, he's one of the greatest horsemen of all time. That dude knew how to party. He knew how to have a good time. He knew how to spend money. So out of the ring, he checked all the boxes. In the ring, maybe not so much. I've never been able to get a straight answer out of this, though, Eric. I've sort of talked about it with you. I've sort of talked about it with Rick. I've sort of talked about it with Arn. Were Arn and Flair ever sort of asked, hey, who would you like in the group? Or is that just not the way the collaboration process really worked back then?
Of course they were asked. Of course they were part of the discussion. Did they have the ability to throw a flag and say no? I don't think so.
Right.
But if they would have thrown a flag and said no, we probably would not have moved forward, knowing that the chemistry wasn't there. It just wasn't going to work. Rick and Mongo were tight from the get-go.
Right.
Look, I think the idea of putting Mongo in the Four Horsemen was I'm not going to call it a great idea, but it was a solid idea.
I would agree.
I think if there was a mistake in the execution of a really solid idea on paper, is that Mongo should have been the finisher. He should have been the anchor. He should have been that power move here, power move there to set up a finish, whether Arn's going to go over, Rick's going over, whoever, Chris Benoit. If Mongo would have been in there as, I got to get new lights. These suckers only last about 20 minutes now. If Mongo would have been a part of the group and his role would have been to soften somebody up for the kill, or to be, not to take anything away from Arn, but to be kind of that enforcer, backup, use only, break glass in an emergency only kind of character, and not let him try to be a horseman in the sense of the way he wrestled. Because there's no way a guy like Mongo, who's going to come into the business late in life, no matter how much of a phenomenal athlete he was, and he was, there's no way that guy's going to be able to hold a candle from a technical perspective and do the kind of things that an Arn or Rick or Chris Benoit are going to be able to do. But he could do 4, 5, or 6 things that were devastating and have an important role. I think the mistake in hindsight was that we let, and this comes from an agenting kind of failure, we let him do too much. We let Mongo try to do more than he was really ready to do yet. And all you need is a couple botches. All you need is a mistake here or a mistake there, especially when you're in a high profile position, especially when you got people who are so, loyal to the Four Horsemen and the tradition and the history and all that. The minute you botch something, you're kind of branded for life. And I think if we would have brought Mongo in with his credibility, his notoriety in the NFL, because he was, we don't go back and read about some of the things that people said and wrote about Steve McMichael and as a part of the Chicago Bears, he was as legit of an NFL player as there was out there.
Absolutely.
And it's scary on top of it, just intimidating. That fit very well into Four Horsemen. Had we not let him overexpose himself in his own enthusiasm and desire to do more, it would have been better for everybody.
Well, let's talk about what maybe wasn't best for everybody, but it was good for the whole. The NWO really becomes a thing in July here of 96, and it kills the momentum of the Horsemen as a whole because essentially everybody's turning babyface now. So guys like Flair and Arn, who've always been standing across the ring from guys like Sting and Lex, they're teaming up in War Games because they want to keep this new rival outfit, these outsiders, to not steamroll through the whole company. And the whole Horsemen versus the NWO thing gets started, but it doesn't feel like it ever reaches full speed. Do you think, like, even, the whole Hog Wild event where Hogan's going to win the title and he spray paints it with the NWO and all that jazz, that was against Flair. And so it's fun to see it get up and going, but it almost feels like we kind of move on. Do you think there would have been an opportunity for it to be just the Horsemen versus just the NWO and then maybe try WCW? Or why did you think creatively at the time it was best for everyone to sort of band together against the outsiders?
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
There you go. Yes.
That was the psychology behind that. So yeah, even though Rick and Arn, Horsemen, traditionally heels,
right?
But to have this group come in and try to take over WCW from the outside and have that be such a threat that former enemies would align, however temporary as it may be, to keep that threat away, to me made the threat more believable. It made it more important. To answer your question, could we have done something that was just Horsemen and NWO and then move on to the rest of the team or the rest of the organization at WCW, start going after Sting and Luger and all the other people that represented WCW as a brand for so long? Yeah, possibly. Do I think it would have worked better than what we did? Hard to say. I'm reluctant to suggest that it even might have, because of what we did do work so well. It's hard to imagine just the Horsemen and NWO first having more impact, because the NWO came in to seek and destroy. I mean, they wanted to seek and destroy everything. They wanted to completely turn the organization upside down. And I think having a traditional angle first with the NWO and Horsemen before we got to the seek and destroy, could have, maybe. It's possible. Would have worked. It's hard to imagine that it would have worked better than what we did.
I want to give a shout out to everybody over in the group chat. If you're hanging out with us during our live recordings, you're definitely a member of adfreeshows.com. We always say you get the shows early and ad-free. Well, how about being a part of our live studio audience? I want to give another shout out to everybody hanging out, including Denovius Mack and a bunch of others who've joined us. But man, my man Adam Arpin has a great question here. He says, or comment, Mongo should have been to the Horsemen what Solo is to the Bloodline. Man, I think that's right on the money.
Bingo.
I mean, if you would have done that with him and not asked to do too much, and as you said, maybe that's a producer issue, that could have really worked, man. He just pops up, hits a move, done. I like it. He's the enforcer.
Yeah, and I think even, I hesitate to say this because it sounds like I'm criticizing, and I don't want to in this context. But I wish, in retrospect, guys like Arn and Rick, Kevin Sullivan, people that were involved, Benoit would have never done it, but I don't think. But if those guys would have just put the reins on Mongo a little bit, just slowed him down, less is more approach, like we were just discussing, it would have been so much better for Mongo and so much better for the Horsemen. That's a really good observation.
Another observation is once the NWO gets up and going, Arn is hurt. Flair is hurt. He's gonna have a torn rotator cuff. He's gonna have operated on. But in October, right after Fall Brawl, Jeff Jarrett joins the company. He's immediately associated with the group. We've had a lot of fun with this on our network of pods. Do you consider Jeff Jarrett a Horseman?
Technically, yes.
Yeah.
Spiritually, no.
Okay. Well, with Arn's career wrapping up due to his injury, there is a hole that needs to be filled. And Jeff Jarrett is in a story where he's sort of flirting with the Horsemen, and it maybe gets a little convoluted. It's like they let him in and then they kick him out. It was maybe just a little too cute.
Way too cute.
The competitive spirit in Flair is still there, even in his book, which came out in 2004. So this would have been years after this. Quote, personally, I thought we blew away the NWO. Arn could talk better than those guys. Mongo was a marginal performer, but he had $1 million look to go along with his Super Bowl ring. To the fans, we were all tough, believable guys. The only problem was that Arn could no longer continue as an active wrestler. And listen, we have discussed in great detail that now infamous Arn Anderson retirement speech. It's all in the archives, 83 weeks on youtube.com. We've covered it from seemingly every angle. But it does feel like when Arn has to hang it up and give his spot, I know we try it a little longer. It's not the same without Arn Anderson. That's kind of the end of the Horseman to me. What say you?
I agree. Just, so much of it is chemistry. I've talked about it so much, I hate to even mention it again. But the NWO will work because of great casting and a great chemistry. Doesn't mean everybody get along all the time, but on camera, the chemistry was magic. Same true with Horsemen. As I said, as we first started talking about this, you take out Ric Flair, you take out Arn Anderson. What did I say 45 minutes ago? Yeah. It's not the same.
That's right.
And there's not much you can do. It's the magic is in the chemistry. And once you take a big portion of the chemistry out of that chemical equation, it's not the same product. It's just not. People aren't going to feel as connected to it.
Rick would write this. Less than a month after the emotional night when Arn handed over his spot, Hennig turned on the Horseman, slamming my head in the cage door and joining the NWO. The match took place in the heart of Horseman territory, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and basically killed the city for WCW. For a second year in a row, the Horsemen lost War Games in their own backyard. In terms of storyline, the turn and result didn't make sense. The only motive seemed to be burying me. The plot continued with Curt Hennig stealing my robe, tearing off the sleeves, and awarding it to Hogan. Forget the fact that I'd paid $5,500 for the robe and wasn't reimbursed. When it was handed to Hogan, the fan outrage transferred over to him. In other words, it wasn't Kurt's storyline anymore. Hogan stole it. And there's been a lot of hurt feelings about what Rick wrote in his book. And I'm sure he's lashing out, and maybe that's the way he really felt at the time. But I'm curious, did you ever even hear of him trying to be reimbursed for the $5,500 robe? Because that didn't feel like that would have been an issue for WCW at all.
No. Yeah. And if it would have landed on my desk, it would have become even less of an issue than it would have been for WCW as a company.
Right.
So I don't know what the background is on that. I kind of hesitate to comment about things that people wrote in books 19 years ago.
Yes. Good call.
But if there would have been an issue, had I been aware, had Jenny Angle come to me, and she could have easily, and Rick could have easily gone to her.
Right.
They had a great relationship. They were very, very close and had been for a long time. It would not have ended up in Rick's book. Let's just put it that way.
The Horsemen were dormant for a long time. Loosely associated are Benoit and McMichael, but Flair's out. And he's going to be working with Bret Hart, and then he's got the contract impasse and a lot of legal wrangling. Eventually, it all gets worked out. And it is one of the more memorable moments in television wrestling history, certainly Nitro history, when the Horsemen are reformed seemingly for the last time. Arn Anderson introduces the group It's Dean Malenko as a new addition. And then eventually, as we know, he brings out Ric Flair. It was September 14th in Greenville. It's a super emotional night. Meltzer would say, interview, although he may very well might be, but at his motivated best, nobody can touch him. And for people who admit to Flair being a great worker, but not a superstar in the industry on the level of others who have more mainstream notoriety, or say he's past the point due to his age of being marketed as a top star, well, the earthquake-sounding reverberations heard around the country on 9/14 must have been quite the jolt of reality. You can tell that Dave is a really, really big fan, and what an iconic night that was, and it was a special moment, and you're a big part of that. Fire me. I'm already fired. This is like the last great Horseman moment, in my opinion. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. But going back to, something that Rick said in his book about how we killed Winston-Salem, obviously we intended to piss off the audience.
Right.
We booked it in Winston-Salem, and we booked that finish because we knew the way the audience would react. If somebody would have come to me and said, do you mind if we just kind of do something that's going to probably burn the town as far as ticket sales, because we're going to get so much heat for what we do. People are genuinely going to be pissed off, not in a what's the term? Not a Pavlovian wrestling fan response, but a genuine distaste and hatred and angry for what we did. Now, you're going to build up Ric Flair. When Ric Flair comes back, it's going to be even more meaningful because of the way he was treated, because the fans are loyal to the Four Horsemen, because the fans love Ric Flair. When you finally do bring him back, there's going to be even more support for him. But in the meantime, we're going to piss off a lot of people in Winston-Salem, despite the fact that the rest of the country is going to get with what we're doing because it's real heat. Would you do that again? And the answer would be in a minute, less than a minute. It would take me less time to make that decision than it would take for someone to present that opportunity to me. And the reaction that we're getting here, I think, justified it. I think Rick got more love and support in a Horseman in this situation than they would have if they would have gone over in Winston-Salem and sent the fans home happy.
Yeah.
That was the risk. It was a good risk. And I think, as Dave pointed out, despite the fact that he just may have been in love with Ric Flair or the Horseman at the time, I don't know what his feelings were, but I think the reaction that he got, that deafening reaction, if indeed it's true, because it did come from tapeworm, is a result of the way Rick was treated in Winston-Salem. He was coming back. They wanted him back.
This Nitro, where Ric Flair comes back, is the second to last time that Nitro would ever defeat Raw in the ratings. The only other time that Nitro beat Raw in the ratings is after Halloween Havoc that year, where the show went long and a lot of cable systems weren't able to air the main event. So you guys showed Goldberg versus DDP on free TV the night after Halloween Havoc. That's the last time.
Yeah, that's not even fair.
So let's call it what it is. The return of Ric Flair gets enough national attention. It's the last time WCW Nitro beats Monday Night Raw. So I say all that to say, come on, Eric. I know you like to say things here to get some clicks and to fire me up and create some.
Fire you up? I'm not poking you. I'm not trying to light you up. That's your role.
You said here, tongue in cheek, the Horsemen never drew. Well, they got the last time. I mean, come on now. They drew.
Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me?
Wasn't a Prince Ikea match.
Are you suggesting that the last time that Nitro was able to, first of all, the last time that Nitro beat WWE had a lot more to do with WWE than anything going on in WCW or not going on in WCW, number one. Number two is the reason that I don't know the reason. I'm pretty sure that if we look back objectively, it's because of what the NWO did with Rick, to the Horsemen, that made that comeback so powerful. It was the story. It wasn't the Horsemen. It was the story. And as far as me saying that the Horsemen never drew, within my era of WCW, my experience, my firsthand experience from the time I got there till the day that I left, the Horsemen without the NWO was interesting. The fans loved it. It was great entertainment. But when it was the focus of WCW, WCW was losing money. You can't hold me accountable or expect me to be able to comment on what happened with the Crockett organization. That was another world, another time, and it wasn't mine. But my experience, just my experience with the Four Horsemen within WCW from the time I got there to in 1991 to the time I left and whatever, the Horsemen, while the audience loved them, they had a loyal following and all of that. Go back and look at financial records from that time period and tell me otherwise. No, I understand that they may have printed money in the Crockett era. I wasn't there. I don't know. All I know is what I was involved with and what I saw firsthand. It's not a knock on them. It has more to do with where WCW was and the lack of strategy and the lack of creative, all the things that you made fun of me or ripped me about when talking about my concern about where AEW is at and taking on more television at a time when they haven't really figured out their creative yet. That's exactly what I mean. The NW or the Four Horsemen, it's not even a discussion as to whether or not they had the talent or whether their characters were 100% on the money. The question is, what was their creative and did it work? Did they draw revenue in house shows? Did they draw revenue in pay-per-view? Was there licensing and merchandising sales? And in any one of those metrics, the answer is no. It's not because they didn't have the talent. It's not because they weren't viable characters. It's not because they weren't powerful characters. Indeed, they were. The timing wasn't right for them because WCW didn't have what WCW needed to take advantage of the power that they had in the Four Horsemen. It wasn't a talent issue. It was a corporate issue.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you're worried about having corporate issues, maybe you're not exactly sure where to start with your new business, there's only one place to look, and that's Impera. Impera.com/Eric. If you sign up today, you'll get free onboarding, 14 days for free, 24/7 support. You can even get ahead of the game and save 20% on your subscription when you use the promo code WrestleBiz at checkout. Why not launch your business plan faster and with less effort than ever before? Visit empiraa.com/Eric and start your journey to success today. I mean, here's the thing. It's an essential tool for businesses of all sizes. It's going to provide a roadmap for success. It enables collaboration between team members. It's going to foster communication and teamwork. You'll have the peace of mind of knowing that your business plan is well structured, thought out, and achievable, and Impera can help with that. You're going to talk to a real person, and they're going to help you turn your business plan into an idea and then into actionable plans. They're going to provide you visibility into the success of that plan. You're going to know what's working and what's not. Can't recommend it enough. I know Eric loves it. You will too. Check it out. It's Impera.com/Eric. That's EMPIRAA.com/Eric. Listen, you're working against Flair in the build up to Starrcade 98. It's really one of the last great programs that Rick is in WCW. Of course, you beat him. And then the night after, you're going to lose to Flair. And you get control, or he gets control of the company for 30 days. And that story is sort of completely forgotten about in history because instead we do the old finger poke of doom on January 4th, 1999. But it does lead to the last major successful WCW pay-per-view that the company ever had. Uncensored 99 in Louisville at Freedom Hall. We would see Flair turn heel in a first blood steel cage match against the WCW champion Hulk Hogan. Have a little help from his old pal Charles Robinson, and he becomes the WCW champion. Earlier in the night, Benoit and Malenko won the tag titles with the help of Arn Anderson. The Horsemen are riding again, but a few weeks later, old Mongo just wanders off. Lord bless him. He's done with the company. Flair's going to lose the main event of Nitro to Rey Mysterio by DQ, and he drops the title to Diamond Dallas Page at Spring Stampede. That leads to Flair becoming a bit of a nut job. He needs a personal nurse. Asia is going to come in that regard. We're also going to have David Flair come in as U.S. champion, which has Benoit and Malenko leave in May in protest over what Rick is doing. And they're going to join Shane Douglas's Revolution group. And that is the actual end of the Four Horsemen. It's a sad end to a great stable, but listen, it was pretty creative at times. People had a lot of fun. Once upon a time, it drew money. Once upon a time, it drew ratings. But we say this a lot. Timing's everything. And it just felt like the timing was never quite the same as this original version. And that harkens back maybe to the beginning of our conversation today. We talked about the new AEW Collision show and the similarities in that new logo with the OG Nitro logo. And I got to tell you, Eric, I know you're flattered by that, as you should be. I kind of secretly, selfishly hope that when we see that show, we got those big stainless steel letters that say AEW there and that diamond plate. Like just lean into the Nitro nostalgia. I think that would be fun. Like, nostalgia does work, but I'm wondering from your perspective, have we learned just dissecting all the second and third and fourth and fifth and 17th incarnations of the different versions of the Horsemen? Will that nostalgia wear off if that's what they do?
I'll be right back.
While Eric's away, now's a great time to tell you that this is the perfect time to buy a house. If you've been on the fence about whether or not now is the right time to buy a house, I'm telling you, this is it. Prices are going to continue to rise. I know a lot of the naysayers out there were saying, oh, there's going to be a major housing collapse. It just hasn't happened. Now, the days on market are staying longer, meaning once upon a time, during the height of the pandemic, you would list a house and man, you might have 40 offers the same day. That's no longer the case. And it is true, interest rates have ticked up a little bit, but not nearly what you might imagine. But what it does mean is it's not going to be as difficult to find a home or get a good deal. You see, once upon a time when there's 40 offers and half of them are cash, how can a fella who's trying to finance compete? Well, he'd have to offer over asking price by a considerable sum. But if the cash buyers did the same, for instance, a few years ago, I had a friend who made over 40 offers on a home and they never found one. But they have now, and they got a much better deal. You see, the reality is, with less people competing for a house, you're more apt to get a good deal. And here's the reality. Rates are going to come down, and you can always refinance later. If you take a look at interest rates historically, you'll see that they've always gone up and down. But let's not be foolish enough to think that when we sign up for a new loan today, that we never refinance. Come on. What matters most is you want to date the rate, marry the house. Find the house that works for you and your family, get the best deal you can, and enjoy the home. And then eventually, when the interest rates improve, we'll refinance you for free over at SaveWithConrad.com. It's a part of our SaveWithConrad.com 7-year guarantee. We want you to have the peace of mind of knowing that you've got the best deal for your family now without having to pay 2 whole sets of closing costs. We're going to get rid of our origination, those points you've heard about. We won't even charge you a processing fee or an underwriting fee. Now, yes, your local county will have recording costs, and yes, we may have to pay an attorney in your state to actually generate the closing documents, but no fee to us. We want to be your mortgage advisor for life, and the first step to home ownership is to figure out, what do I want my new house payment to be? You see, at SaveWithConrad.com, we ask you, what do you want your new house payment to be? You tell us, and then we tell you what type of house to go shopping for. You'll know exactly the price point you want to start shopping for to get the exact monthly payment you want. How easy is that? Find out how easy it is to buy a home with no money down. That's right, if you're a veteran, you're buying in a rural area, or you use one of our down payment assistance programs, you can buy a new home with 0 money down. And oftentimes your new house payment is less than your current rent. Why wouldn't you do this? Find out how easy it is to become a homeowner at SaveWithConrad.com. That's savewithconrad.com, NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. Let's do a question here from Adam Arpin. I wonder if they ever approached Ole about taking on the JJ role in later renditions of the Horsemen while JJ was head of talent relations in WWF. That might have been interesting. As I understand it, Ole was shown the door in 94, so he wasn't really around in the company. Was there ever a consideration in, say, 95, 96, 97, 98, somewhere in there to say, hey, let's get Ole back? Or were you just glad to be out of the Ole business?
No, Ole was too, Ole was, he was too negative. He resented too much. He just had so much baggage. He was pissed off at the world. He didn't respect Rick. He didn't respect Dusty. He didn't respect me, which I can understand. Everybody, the entire world was wrong but him, and he was the only one that knew how to do things right, in his opinion. And I can kind of understand that to a degree if you can manage it internally and work with other people. But when you got a guy who is, I think at that time, Ole might have been a vice president. Bob Dew would have made him that. Punching holes in the walls of the offices at Turner Broadcasting.
Yeah, that don't work.
It just doesn't work. Ole was too bitter. That's the better word. He was too bitter to do business with. I'm going to go back to your question about AEW and the logo and seeing the stainless steel set and all that.
Do you think that could just be a short-term thing, or do you think that could work long-term? Is nostalgia short-term?
I think if it's a short-term, if that colors and the logo and the direct ripoff, that's what it is. As flattering as it may be, it is what it is. It can work, and parts of me would love to see it. But going back to what we talked about for the first 30 minutes of the show, having had some experience in trying to recreate something, you run a very high risk.
Right.
And here's the truth from my perspective. It doesn't mean it's a fact. It's just the way I look at things, and I believe it to be true. That the fans' perception, those fans who think that, who watch Nitro and were part of that, and it changed their lives and it brought them back into wrestling. Because let's keep in mind, in the early 90s, because of the steroid trial in WWE at the time and all the craziness that was going on there, and the fact that WCW couldn't hit their ass with both hands in a compass, they couldn't find their ass with both hands in a compass, creatively speaking, because that is a big part of the business. The audience for wrestling was leaving. The prevailing opinion, the consensus opinion among television executives that I worked with 92, 93, 94 was that wrestling was dead. The audience has come and gone. Wrestling is going to be a part of television history. It's never going to come back to its glory days. That was the consensus opinion amongst people that were not only in the wrestling business, but in the television business as well. And that changed, and we created this Monday Night War thing, blah, 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 blah. We all know what that is. And people will have a feeling about Nitro and a relationship with Nitro and what was, and it's overblown in their minds in a way. I'm not saying this the way I want to say it. People who were fans of Nitro and recognized Nitro for what it was and how it changed the industry, and during that period of time, put Nitro and the product on a little bit of a pedestal in some regards. And to a large degree, it's unfair. This is not really true. I mean, there was a lot of things that we did at Nitro that changed the industry. Yes, there's a lot of things that made it better, made it more interesting, created the Monday Night Wars. Yes. But when you bring something back, much like you're bringing back the Four Horsemen or trying to bring back a character, the audience expectations and their kind of fantasy relationship with the original version makes it almost unattainable. It's the risk of disappointing the audience if you lean too much into, okay, you know, we're AEW, but man, we were born in this Nitro, whatever. We're an extension of it. A little bit of it's okay. Too much of it'll backfire big time because there's no way AEW will be able to deliver on the promise. As unfair as the promise may be, they'll be unable to deliver on it. Not because of all the obvious reasons, because they just don't have the creative horsepower or the vision. It's not even creative, it's vision and strategy. They don't have anything new or different. So to lean too much into the Nitro thing could backfire. I think it has a little, you know, at least what I see, social media.
Let's put a button on the Four Horsemen talk. What do you think the Four Horsemen legacy will be in this sport?
Originators, innovators. They were the first, right? They were the first real powerful, successful, stable. And nobody is going to be able to take that away from them. Not the NWO, not the Bloodline. Nobody. They were the first. It's a big advantage in being first, and they were the first, and they did it well, and they did it very well.
Next week,
that's a legacy.
Next week, we're going to talk about the legacy of Lex Luger. We're going to cover his time in WCW from 98 to 99. We'll talk about joining the Wolfpack, turning heel in early 99 with the NWO, and the plans for his return before you left WCW. By the way, I just want to give a shout out. As this episode drops, we are exactly 1 month away from our annual Top Guy Weekend event. I can't believe this is real. Huntsville was voted on to be this year's location. We've done it twice in Chicago, and now we're coming to Huntsville. We're going to have a lot of very special guests here. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. Super excited. I don't even want to spoil it, but let me just say, Eric, you often have said on the show, it can be less than, better than, or different than, you know, some of the things we're doing. This year's Top Guy Weekend, it's going to be different than, is it not?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot different, but I think it can be, it will be a lot more engaging. I think fans are going to have an opportunity to be a part of the event as much as showing up to the event. So that's cool.
It's going to be fun. By the way, there's still a chance for you to join us over on Ad-Free Shows. Sign up right now at adfreeshows.com. By the way, if you sign up and become an annual member, we'll see you at Top Guy Weekend. Why not join us? By the way, if you're not sure about the value, why not try a free trial on us? Just go check it out right now. Your first week is free. We want you to get a peek under the hood, see what's what. Come to some of our live tapings, see some of the bonus events. You get bonus events with, man, a who's who, Kurt Angle and Arn Anderson. And my God, we just had Mick Foley earlier this week. Something for everybody. By the way, if your business targets men 25 to 54 years old, there's no better place to advertise than right here with us on 83 Weeks. You've heard us do some of the same ads for the same companies for years. Want to know why that is? Well, because it really works. And with our super targeted audience, there's very little waste. Go right now to advertisewitheric.com and find out more about advertising here with 83 Weeks. Love to have you check out Eric's new book. It's on Amazon. It's bischoffbook.com, or of course on Amazon. You can find Grateful. I absolutely loved it. Got some summer travel coming up. I'm sure a lot of people do. Why not go ahead and read what Easy E has to say? We'd love to have your interactions on social as well. The show handles are easy. It's at 83 Weeks on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Eric over on Twitter at eBischoff. I am at Hey, it's Conrad. And of course, the easiest way to support our show is to go subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's 83 Weeks on YouTube.com. That's 83 Weeks on YouTube.com. Tons of new swag too available, including the brand new Endeavor to Persevere. How about their stickers you can put on your laptop, like the big gold belt? Maybe it's time to do some grilling. We got an 83 Meats little Yeti cooler. And, it's the NWO inspired swag that you've been looking for. It's 83weeksmerch.com. That's 83weeksmerch.com. Eric, I had a lot of fun talking with you today. I always love yelling at you and debating AEW, and I'm sure we'll do more of that next week. But I'm glad we set the record straight, and you and I agreed the Horsemen were the innovators. Bravo to the Horsemen, and congratulations to Tony Khan, or as Eric Bischoff would say, fuck you very much. So,
wow, you were just evil.
I'm excited, man. Listen, if you would have told me, and I think we can all agree with this, this cat started this thing just over 4 years ago. He didn't even have his first episode 4 years ago. And now he's got his third show on the Turner Network, 2 of which are going to be live. Like, that just didn't even seem possible just 5, 6, 7 years ago. And now it's happening. I think it's moving in the right direction for the whole industry. I'm excited to see what's happening with WWE. It seems like their stock is just climbing by the day. As a wrestling fan, I just think it's good for the business. And I know you think that's pandering bullshit, but as a wrestling fan, I have to admit, 10 years ago, I wasn't sure this thing would even exist in 30 years. It felt like it was just on a downward trend, and maybe it was going to become passe, and it was going to be something like Roller Jam or something. And it was something we used to do, and then it just went away. And I'm glad that doesn't seem to be the case right now. Now we feel like with everything that WWE has done, and certainly the investment we've seen from the Turner organization, man, there's going to be wrestling for a while. And I think that's good for people who work in the business and good for the fans of it. So apologies for being excited about a new show and hopefully a boatload of cash coming into the industry.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Wow. It took us 2.5 hours, but we finally agreed. Let's just stop there so we don't.
I was just about to follow it up with a comment, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Not here, not now.
Send your hate tweets to @ebischoff, and we'll be back next week right here on 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Fite Plus is the ultimate digital platform for live sports and entertainment, and they're now offering a free 7-day trial at tryfite.com. Fite Plus is packed with a premium live event schedule, over 1,000 hours of live action every year, and a library of more than 4,000 hours on demand, plus exclusive content you can't get anywhere else. Fite is a great partner of ours. They support us, so let's support them. Give that free 7-day trial a shot, and you'll be a member for life. That's tryfite.com. tryfite.com.
Hey guys, need to call a quick timeout here. Wanted to tell your listeners what I've been telling my listeners over at OU didn't know for a while now about all the cool things happening over at AdsFreeShows.com.
An all-new mailbag series debuts later this month on Ad Free Shows as we pick the brain of a man who has spent 40-plus years in the wrestling business. Longtime WCW and WWE referee Nick Patrick answers your questions.
And Kurt Angle, where you get here on it? Or me on it? It ended up being my own blood. Austin had the title. It had those jagged edges on it, right? And they had a deal where Angle pulled me in, and I took the belt shot.
A little bonus content comes your way, courtesy of The Kurt Angle Show. A dream match became a reality back in 2016 as Kurt Angle squared off against Cody Rhodes on the Independents. For the first time, Kurt watches back his match against the American Nightmare.
This kid's really talented.
He's selling the ankle here on the leapfrog, went down on it awkwardly. He's outside the ring talking to the referee. This is, like you said, all part of the match plan. Hey, start to show that weakness in the ankle.
Yeah. This was his idea to make it look like he hurt his ankle so that when he did lose, he had something to gripe about.
Ad-free show members have chatted one-on-one with AEW stars like Eddie Kingston, Dax Harwood, Ricky Starks, and many more, including a recent live interactive session with Renee Paquette.
He still continues to do that. He's on commentary in AEW. I think it was cool for him to kind of put on that analyst hat and get to kind of test out those waters a little bit. But end of the day, it was a thing that I think made him feel like, you know what, wrestling can be okay again. I can have fun in the wrestling space again. And now we have CM Punk wrestling. So you're welcome.
That's just a small taste of what we got waiting for you. With 4 levels to choose from, see for yourself why Ads Free Shows is the best value in wrestling today. Sign up now at adsfreeshows.com.